What's going on, everyone? So we're finally, at last, doing the Guardians. As you can tell by my voice, I think, I am a little sick. This is why this video has been delayed. I've been sick for the past couple of days. I think I had the flu or whatever, so sorry about that. I know you guys have been eagerly waiting. So, without further ado, we're going into every single build for your Guardians. Now, I'm going to preface this the last time, seeing as this is the last video. We're going to be going over general build paths, but emphasizing some of the items that are either niche or specific to certain gods. So keep that in mind, that if you do think of an item that could fill a place of the build path, that you're probably right. This is a general build path, so certain items can fill that place. But you also need to keep in mind that the builds that we do give you will always, or for the most part, work in a majority of your games. So without the way, we're also going to be doing this with my friend, Dr. Professor Mr. Michael. We're going to go back and forth, similar to the Warrior video, if you've seen that, seeing as these build paths are going to be a lot more complex, and there are more things to think about, so he is here to help me as well. And then the last thing I will say, that if you are going to be watching throughout the video, there are a lot of items that you should or can go depending on team comps, similar things, or some things such as anti-crit items like Spectral Armor, or anti-heal items like Pestilence, or other things like Tainted Steel, for example. So if you do want more of those specific items, do watch basically after this intro so you can understand that. It's going to be the same thing as the Warrior video, where I added a section of your potential items you go depending on your team comps. This one's going to be basically the same, but more emphasized, seeing as these are your Guardians. These are going to be your setup, peel, and so these items are going to be a lot more important and impactful on your Guardians. So do keep that in mind, as later the video goes, the more I'm going to be zipping through them. And so some items that you may be thinking about, I've already explained in the beginning of the video. So yeah, but with that out of the way, let's start with Ares. Now, we're not going to go into Ares right away. What I'm going to do is, unlike Warriors, where I went over the build first and then I went into your alternate items, specific items, depending on their team comp, we're going to do that first here. So we're going to be talking about anti-heal. So there are basically three items you want to prioritize when thinking about going anti-heal. That is Pestilence, and then I'm blanking on the physical item, its name. I don't really go this a lot, but why am I forgetting? Bear with me here. It should be under here. Yeah, Contagion. That's what it is. That is the physical version of Pestilence. Pestilence does give you, let's see, 30. So it does give you 55% anti-heal with its aura and passive when it's fully stacked. And then your Contagion also gives you 25%. And then last item on here, we're going to go into a Tainted Steel. Otherwise, there are two other upgrades. We do have Tainted Amulet and Tainted Breastplate. Now, these items are what you're going to want to go if they do have a lot of oppressive healing. So if they have a god like an Aphrodite on their team, then you're definitely going to want to buy either Tainted Steel and Pestilence, or just Tainted Steel. But depending on how oppressive their healing is going to depend on how many anti-heal items you go. One thing to keep in mind is that Contagion and Pestilence do not stack. So buying these two items is not good at all. One thing you want to do instead, to try to get as much anti-heal as you can, you are going to want to go into your Tainted Steel, and then either one of these, either your Pestilence, either Pestilence if they do have two magical team or two magical gods. Let's say they have an Afro, a Disco, a Discordia, and a Guan Yu. That's their team, for example. Well, they have two magical gods, and they have one physical, being Guan. Pestilence is going to give you more of those protections against Aphrodite and Disco. So Pestilence is going to be very good to go here instead. If they have like two physical team comp, let's say they have like a Guan, a Hunter, and a Maze, for example, and Contagion will be your other option here, just to make sure that you have physical protections for those physical gods. And like I said, it'll depend on how oppressive their healing is. Let's just say they have a Guan Yu, for example, and that's all the healing that they have on their team. Well, in this case, you can go tainted into like a contagion, for example, and you do get a lot of anti-heal with both these items. But honestly, you don't need to do that. It's only Guan. It is a lot of healing he does give, but Tainted Steel should be enough to counterbalance that healing that they're going to be getting. Whereas if they had a Aphrodite and a Guan Yu on their team, for example, then you absolutely are going to need to go into either or. And do keep in mind, if they do have any type of healing, you're going to want to prioritize the items earlier in the build, besides the other items that we're going to be talking about that are going to be given to those gods. So always keep in mind that anti-heal you're going to need to prioritize very earlier into the build, especially with Tainted, seeing as this is a starter. Now, and very similar to the Warriors, I'm going to go over this, but the difference between Tainted Amulet and Tainted Breastplate, they both have really good passives. The passives are basically very similar, where it's Tainted Breastplate gives their healing taking reduced by a flat 50%, whereas Tainted is a better version of the Tainted Steel. One other difference that you do want to keep in mind is the magical versus physical protections. As you can see, Tainted Amulet does give 75% magical protections while only giving 25, and vice versa with Breastplate, where Breastplate gives you 70 physical protections and only 25. So depending on the team comps, you're going to want to, will dictate which ones you're going to upgrade into. If they have 2 physical gods, then you want to go into Tainted. If they have 2 magical, then you would want to go into an Amulet a majority of the time. So generally speaking, though, Tainted Breastplate I do think has a better passive. But that is your anti-heal. Other than that, we have a Midgardian Mail. And a last item that we're going to be talking about here for your situational items, depending on their team comp, is Spectral Armor. Now, with Midgardian Mail does give you a crazy passive. If you're going up against Hunters or a Magical ADC, for example, they do have a, and they are doing a lot of oppressive auto attacks where they're just shredding you or your backline, for example. Midgardian here is for you. Midgardian Mail basically reduces the movement speed and attack speed by 8% for 3 seconds and stacks up to 4 times. So basically, you're getting 32% reduction in their movement speed and attack speed whenever you're autoed. So this can be very good against shutting down those Hunters on their enemy team if they're being very oppressive. So that is also your situational item that you're going to want to prioritize instead of your physical defense item that you would normally build, which we'll go into depending on each god. But that is that. And then otherwise, we do have Spectral Armor, which, if you don't know, is basically an anti-crit item. It has an aura that reduces crit strikes by 40%, and that's within an aura between your gods. So in Joust, you are near your gods a lot of the time. So this aura is very good for your team. Not only that, they recently buffed this a lot. So its passive also now, whenever you get hit by a critical strike, gives you physical and magical power. And as a guardian, you'll be getting magical power. So you can get upwards of 45 magical power every time you get critical strikes. So this isn't really a bad item. Not only that, it gives really decent good, or it gives really good base stats where it gives you physical protection, health, mana, and NP5. So it's not a bad item at all. Before, it used to be one of those items where it's like, fine, I guess I'll buy this item because I have to. But now it is still one of those items where you have to buy it, just because if they are building crit, you're going to want to make sure you build a Spectral Armor to balance or counteract their crit against you and your team. But when you buy this item, it does have a lot of decent stats, as well as a good aura and a passive. So Spectral Armor is very good on for gods, or is very good for a situational item for people who are building crit. But that is basically your situational items. Again, this is for anti-crit. If they're building crit in their builds, make sure that you are watching their builds, especially as a guardian, to make sure that you can, if they're building into crit, you want to build that. Midgardian Mail is going to be depending on how badly their Hunter is destroying your team, for example. But Midgardian is very good to counter a Hunter or magical ADC. And then your anti-heal is for those gods who are very oppressive with their healing, or may just have a little bit of healing, and you can just go into a Tainted, for example. And that is basically your situational items for all of your gods. Make sure you do prioritize these earlier in the build so you can help you and your team. All right. So starting off with our first god, we have Ares. Now, Ares is a very oppressive god. He has a lot, and I mean a lot, of things that he does. In his abilities, he basically just makes you not move at all. It cripples them, as well as your movement ability, so you can't run away if you ever are chained, On top of that, you can auto cancel with this and do a fuck ton of damage, especially seeing as high resin buffed him twice for no reason. And that being with his 2. His 2 now gives him a lot of shit. It gives him HP 5. It gives him basic attack damage for him and his team. It gives him CCR. And now it also gives you guys protections. And depending on how many gods you have shackled up, also increases your protections. Now, with his 3-2, it does very good damage paired with his 1. And then obviously his ult is very impressive as well. One thing you do want to keep in mind with Ares, though, is that he does have a passive where every aura item he gets, he just gets straight up power. So basically on Ares, very dissimilar to a lot of the other guys that we're going to be talking about here, he builds a lot, and I mean like basically his entire item kit or his entire build, his entire build is just aura items. So starting off with our start, we're going to go into a Warrior's Axe. Warrior's Axe is pretty good on him. It's going to make him a little bit more tanky, seeing as the build I'm going to go is not going to make him the tankiest god. So you're going to want to make sure Warrior's Axe is there. You can maybe go like a Conduit Gem or a Sands of Time, but I think Warrior's Axe with Ares is really good on him. After that, we're going to go into our Earring, very similar to your Assassins and your Warriors. You're not going to have a lot of mana, so you're going to want to make sure that you buy Mystical Earring, and you're going to buy Mystical Earring on a lot of your gods, on a lot of your Guardians as well, seeing as Guardians basically just use a quarter of their mana every time they use an ability. Now, there was a guy in the comment section that said that he doesn't like going it, and that's totally fine. You don't need to go Mystical Earring. You can go straight into like a Gauntlet or whatever, your first tier Gauntlet. But do keep in mind, though, if you're going to be very low on mana after you use your ability. So you're either going to make sure to choose to make sure you use your abilities wisely, or buy an extra few mana pots for yourself. After that, we're going to go into our Bountiful Bow. There, you can make a case for other recipes, such as your Drumstick or your Sturdy Stew for him, but again, they're just too situational and just not consistent enough that is anywhere comparable to Bow or Gooseberries. These are two of your best items for most of your gods. With Guardians, however, Bow is just going to give you that very consistent cooldown. So we're going to go Bow with him, and then we have enough gold for our Chalice, so we're going to go into our Chalice of Healing. Now, our first item we're going to go into a Gauntlet of Thebes. That's obvious. With this, you're also getting power. I don't know if it calculates it within this. Let's see. It does not. No, but you are getting 30 power with his passive. Like I said, his passive, he gives him 30 additional power based on aura items. Now, after this, a very interesting item that's going to be showing up a lot is a Relic Dagger. I think Relic Dagger is so good. It's a core item in Conquest. You always build Relic Dagger in Conquest. It's just way too good, especially with it now having glyphs, in which both glyphs are really good. It's such a sleeper, awesome item. I think it is the cheapest item in the game with only 1850. So you're buying this item within like 3 or 4 waves. You're basically getting this so quickly online. Now 3 or 4 waves might be hyperbolic, but you get the point. It's such a cheap item. This does give you 300 health, so you're not, it doesn't give you any protections, I will say, but with it giving you 300 health, 10% cooldown, 10% CCR, 7% movement speed, and what you're really buying this item for is its passive, which gives you a 40% cooldown reduction in your relics. Now, if you know Ares uses Blink. Blink is one of the best relics on Ares, seeing as you can Blink ult, and you basically secure a giant, or basically the entire team, with your ult chains. So Relic Dagger is going to be very good to reduce your blink cooldown. One thing that has always been a thing about these gods that do, like Ares ult, for example, or Ymir blink freeze, is that a lot of the times when you blink and you Ares ult, for example, most of the gods will have beads, in which case you're going to burn those beads. The problem with that, though, is that you use your blink basically the same time that they use their beads, and they're basically on the same exact cooldown. I believe it's 180 seconds. So a lot of the time when you blink, they use their beads at the same time. The next time you have their blink up, they already have their beads up again. So with Relic Dagger, you're going to have an extra 40 seconds of buffer time, to where now your blink is already back up, and you can blink ult, and you can almost guarantee that they're never going to have their beads up. Now, that's not to say that they don't have a CC immune ult, for example, but if they don't, then you're almost always guaranteed to get a Ares pull. So that is also a very good thing for a lot of the Guardians that we're going to be talking about upcoming. But with Ares, that is one specific reason. And not only that, the reason why I like building the second item, you don't have to. I will talk about that in a sec. You don't have to go Relic Dagger second item. But with Gauntlet of Thebes, you're going to be stacking this with Warrior's Axe. So you'll be tanky enough to where this item is cheap enough where you can buy the second item. And like I said, it doesn't get protections. You'll still be okay, and you'll still, not get one shot, for example. As well, this does give 300 health, so it is technically making you tankier. But that is one item I like to go into. Now, talking about the upgraded for Relic Dagger, another thing that's really good about him is the upgraded glyph Bewitched Dagger. Now, you might be thinking, why would you go this? If you're not, then whatever. But you go Bewitched Dagger. With this, you always go this on Ares. With this upgraded glyph, you have an extra, you get your relics are received are 40% cooldown reduction, but you also get a glyph, the upgraded glyph, Bewitched Dagger. All your enemies have 25% reduced attack speed in a 55 unit radius around you. This is an aura item. So not only are you getting all the benefits that I said earlier with Relic Dagger just being Relic Dagger, you're also getting 30 more power. Because this is technically an aura item. So you're also getting 30 more power. On top of the fact that you're reducing attack speed, which is basically a Midgardian male. So, I mean, Jesus Christ, this is like, I think it's like one of the best items in the game. There's so many things you get from this item that I think it's too good not to be core. And so I like building Relic Dagger here. Like I said, you don't have to build it here. You can build it later in the build, but I think making sure you get Relic Dagger on sooner rather than later to make sure you're able to set up for your team and snowball potentially with your blink ult combo or whatever the hell. I just think it's really good to go on second item. So you're going to go into your Relic Dagger next. After that, we're going to go into a Sovereignty. Sovereignty, you're basically going to go into your traditional tank build because it just benefits Ares so much. You're going to go into your Sovereignty, and this will give you just very similar to what I've said in your Warriors. You're going to get 30 physical protections. The Aura, giving you physical protections as well as HP 5, which stack really well with his 2, seeing as it's basically his 2. His 2 gives him HP 5 and protection. So it's basically just another 2, another Ares 2, basically. And after that, we're going to go into a Shoguns. Like I said, with a lot of the other builds, you will switch out. You'll build one of these sooner rather than the other one. For example, if you have 2 physical team comp, you're going up against a 2 physical team comp, you're going to go Sovereignty first. If you're going up against a 2 magical team comp, for example, you're going to go Shoguns and then Sovereignty. But for sake, we're just going to do that. At this point, if you haven't sold your Mystical Earring already, then you're going to go ahead and sell that. And then your last item I like to go is Pythag's piece. Now, like I said, this isn't the tankiest build in the world. As you can see, you're only getting your tanks from your defense from your Warrior's Axe, Gauntlet, your Sovereignty, and your Shoguns. Keep in mind, though, you do have a fuck ton of health, so not like you're going to be. Now, these protections are wrong because it's not counting the upgraded Gauntlet. But with the fact that you're going to be using your 2 a lot, and this is going to be giving you a lot of protections, on top of Ares giving you Ares just being good with a lot of these aura items, you don't really need the most tankiest build in the world. Now I'm going to be talking about some other items that you can go that you can go instead of this, but with Pythag's piece, this is very good as well. It gives you 10% cooldown, it gives you magical power, it gives you even more health, it gives you magical lifesteal, and then it gives you an aura where it gives your teammates either lifesteal, magical lifesteal, physical lifesteal, or magical lifesteal or physical lifesteal, and magical power or physical power depending on what team you have. So I think this is a very good item as well. With this build, you're getting a shit ton of power. Let's see, you're getting 30, 60, 90, 120, 150. So you're basically just getting 150 power for free. And that is basically your build here. Like I said, you're not going to be that tanky, but with Ares, you are basically a tanky god anyways. When I went into jungle practice and I tested this build out, you're getting basically 250, 260 of each protection, I believe, when you would use your 2. Either that, I think the protections were a little bit off. I can't remember. Maybe it was 240. You're getting into the mid 200s, so you're not like squishy by all means, while also having a fuck ton of health. But basically, this is your build to go when you want to do a lot of damage while also being pretty tanky and having a lot of utility. You do have 30% cooldown with this build. You have Pythax Piece giving you 10, Shogun's 10, Relic Dagger gives you 10, and that is your build. Now, you don't really want to upgrade your starter with him. What I like to do with him instead, there are some situational items you can go, which I will just put down here. You can sell, preferably you sell your starter and you can go into these items. I'm just going to go ahead and just put these out. You have Mystical Mail, you have Heartward Amulet, and then I believe the other one is Ethereal Staff. Ethereal Staff is the weaker one, but that is fine too. And then there is Pridwin. Now, usually with this build, I like to sell your Warrior's Axe and then go into a Mystical Mail. This gives you a little bit more physical D, while also having an aura that gives you even more power, and its passive does give you a lot of extra damage just by being near someone. And as Ares, you're always near someone. So this would be my preferred final build. You can upgrade into a Sundering Axe if you want, but I do think that going into an aura item like Mystical Mail is better. Now, if they don't have, I guess I don't want to put hardwood here. If they don't have a, if you don't have a hunter on your team, for example, you would switch out your Shoguns for a Heartward, and vice versa. If you do have a hunter on your team, you definitely want to go Shoguns. But if you don't, then Heartward is there for you as well. So that's good there too. E-Staff is here just for a little bit of damage. Like I said, it's the weaker one. You don't need to go this, but it's always there seeing it's the Guardian. And then Pridwin, obviously, Pridwin isn't the best on Ares. It isn't the worst. It's just a pretty good item on him. And you can always go Pridwin on him, and it's not a troll item. So if you didn't want to go Pythax Piece, for example, and you wanted to be tankier, then you can just go into a Pridwin. This will cap out your cooldown. You'll have 40% cooldown, and you'll be a lot tankier. Do keep in mind, though, is you will have to sacrifice one of these two glyphs depending on what you want more. But like I said, you can do a lot with this build. My preferred build, like I said, let me go ahead and get rid of this, for example, or this example build. We're going to go into, obviously, your Warrior's Axe, Gauntlet, your Relic Dagger, Sovereignty, Shoguns, or Amulet, depending on your team comp, and your Pythax Piece. You sell your Warrior's Axe for your Mystical Mail, and that is your final build. Otherwise, you can flip-flop your Pridwin for Pythax Piece, and that will be your extra defense if you wanted that as well. But other than that, that is your general Ares build.
All right, and next up is Artio. Artio is a fantastic guardian for chasing down the enemies. She doesn't have the best peel in the game or anything like that, but she does have a stun or two. She does have a good cripple. She can stun people down if you hit all of her 3 as well. Good healing in her 1 and 3 as well. She's overall a very good god to chase down enemies, and she's very annoying. She's a spammy god. She's almost like the guardian class of she's almost like King Arthur, but for the guardians, essentially. So what you're going to want to do with her is you're going to start off with a tier 1 axe. She works very, very well with axe. You can also go Sands of Time if you really want to, and then you could sell that off later on if you want early mana and a little bit more damage. But this build, we're going to go into an axe. Next, you're going to go into a tier 1 Griffinwing Earring for that mana, because Artio is extremely mana hungry. She always has mana issues. You definitely want to get some MP5 off, especially in the early game. And tier 1 Earring is going to do just that for a very cheap 400 gold. Next, you're going to get into your Chalice of Healing right off the bat, so you can have your healing for the rest of the game. And next up, your first full item, you're going to go into a Prophetic Cloak. Prophetic Cloak, you can proc it on Artio very, very well. She spams your abilities, especially your 3s, very long range. You can get very easy Prophetic stacks. With your 3, you should be able to get it procced up extremely quickly. Next, you're going to go into a Genji's Guard. Genji's Guard is going to fix your mana. Oh, actually, before that, you're going to go into a Manticore Spike. My mistake. You're going to upgrade that earring into a Manticore Spike. So you go from tier 1 Manticore Spike into a Prophetic Cloak, and then you're going to fully upgrade the Manticore Spike. Manticore Spike is very good on Artio. She can proc it on her 3 and also her 2, and you can pick it up very easily and proc it on people for even more extra damage on top of that axe proc. And then after that, you're going to go into your Genji's Guard. Genji's Guard is going to provide you some cooldown, 40 MP5, plenty of magical protections. It's going to fix any remaining MP5 issues that you may have with just building Manticore Spikes. Next up, you're going to go into a Glad Shield. Glad Shield's going to be very good for Artio because she's a spammy god. You spam her abilities all the time in both forms. So that's going to give you a lot of proc damage, and plus you're building a bunch of defense. And it's going to give you some cooldown, some HP 5, so it's going to make you nice and healthy. And last item, you're going to round it off with a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding is going to make you even more tanky. It's going to make it to where you do more damage to the enemies for both yourself and your team. She procs it extremely well with her Cripple, her 2, Stun form, and Bear form. And she also procs it many, multiple times on her 3, the Life Tap ability. Now, this is the build that I would go for most games. You can kind of just have this as a general build for any team comp. For the most part, though, Artio is a very, very versatile god. You can kind of build a lot of different things on her and make it work as long as you're padding your stats, making sure you have good enough physical and magical defense for the team comp that you're going up against. You can pretty much go whatever you want, as long as you're keeping that in mind, and also your cooldowns and your MP5. You could go into a Oni's Hunter Guard if you really want to have more mitigations in your stuff. If you have an ADC on your team, you can swap out that Genji's Guard for a Shogun's as well. If you want more cooldown, you can switch out the Gladiator Shield for a Breastplate of Valor or even a Regrowth, so you can have some extra movement speed with your healing abilities. You could even go an E-Staff at the end instead of Stone of Binding, or you could also even go a Soul Reaver if you want even more proc damage. There's a lot of different things that work on Artio that you can go instead of these items. You could even switch out the physical item for a Midgardian Male if you're having issues with enemy ADCs. So this is the build that I would normally go, but those are some really good options that you can change around, mix and match, and they'll all work on Artio. And this is going to be your Artio build.
All right, we have Athena. Athena is a pretty good god in Joust. She's not the best, considerably compared to Conquest, where she's very good in Conquest. But she's pretty good in Joust. She does have a very good setup with her too. She's a very standard support god. One thing that sets her apart from Joust and Conquest is her ult. Her ult doesn't have the best utility, seeing as the map is really small, and so the amount of times you're ulting is not going to be all that great. I mean, you can maybe do some niche plays where you tell your mage and hunter to maybe bait them into thinking that, you know, that they're free kills or whatever, and you can ult in. But outside of that, you're usually just fighting as a team, so your ult doesn't have that much use. But it's her 1, 2, 3 combo that is really good for your setup. So still a very good god. With her, we're going to go straight into a Sands of Time. Now, you can always go into your Warrior's Axe, but with her, you're not doing a lot of damage. So Warrior's Axe is not going to have that much of an impact. But again, I say Warrior's Axe is still pretty good, as it's still, I think, one of the best starters in the game. But I do think you get more utility out of Sands of Time, as this does give you MP5 and some cooldown, a little bit of power. That's not really relevant, but it's the MP5 and cooldown that's going to be good on Athena. Having a lot of cooldown on Athena is something you're going to want to prioritize. So again, you can go Warrior's Axe, but I prefer Sands. After that, we're going to go into our Earring, very similar to a lot of our Warriors, Assassins, and our Guardians. From there, we're going to go into our Bow. Like I said, we're going to be doing a lot of cooldown, and then we're going to go into our Chalice of Healing. Now, starting off the build, actually, let me just do that. Starting off our build, she does not stack Gauntlet well, or I'm sorry, she does not stack Prophetic well, so we're going to go straight into our Gauntlet. Very cookie cutter stuff. After this, she is a standard, pretty standard Guardian, so you can go items like Sovereignty into a Heart Ward, for example, if you wanted to. But what I like to go on her, and has recently been buffed considerably actually, is Breastplate of Valor. Breastplate of Valor, if it'll tell me, does give you 20% cooldown. Like I said, highlighting that cooldown. You do want to have a lot of cooldown, specifically early in the build. Not only that, they buffed it to where instead of 10 MP5, that now gives you 20 MP5. So you're going to have a lot of MP5 in the game, in the beginning of the game. So that is one thing that's going to be very good on her as well. I actually forgot to do Mystical Earring, Gauntlet, and Breastplate. You're going to have a lot of MP5. Not only that, you do have your glyphs. They recently buffed the hell out of Breastplate of Determination, which you're almost always going to want to go into in this build. So Breastplate of Determination, you're going to want to upgrade sooner rather than later. You don't want to upgrade it like right away, as you do want to get some other items online, but sooner rather than later. You're going to want to do it relatively soon. but with Breastplate of Determination giving you up to 28%. I'm sorry, giving you up to 28 protections of each, depending on however much you get hit. With this glyph, let me just explain it, I guess. Whenever you get hit by a certain damage type, you do get 7 protections based on, that corresponds to that. So if you get hit by a hunter, you get 7 protections, physical protections. If you get hit by a mage, auto, for example, you get 7 magical protections. It stacks up to 4 times, making it to where you get 28 of each protection. And then once you have reached full stacks, it doubles, and it gives you 56, I believe, if I'm doing the math right. So very, very good item to go into. After that, we're going to go into a Shoguns. Shoguns is going to be really good. It just gives you a bunch of stuff. It gives you cooldown, auto attack speed, and it's passive. One item I do want to start prioritizing more talking about is Heartward Amulet. Heartward Amulet is another item you can go. If you don't have a hunter, let's say you're going a double guardian, or I'm sorry, double tank, where you're going like a guardian, warrior, and a mage, for example, Shoguns isn't going to be that great. So you can go into a Heartward, for example. But generally speaking, you're going to have a hunter on your team, or at least you should. So you're definitely going to go Shoguns. I'll go ahead and put Heartward down here for that. After that, we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding is really good on her, as with Stone of Binding, its passive is basically just reducing magical and physical protection. It's basically flat pen. And seeing as her 2 procs that very well, and her 3 actually, because it does give a slow if you are able to hit it, it does slow them as well. So Stone of Binding will proc off of 2 of your abilities. So Stone of Binding will also not only make you tankier, it does give you some health, and its passive is really what's really good on her. So that is definitely very core on her. After that, if you haven't sold your Whimsical Earrings, you do have Relic Dagger. Now, you can, like I said, go Relic Dagger earlier into the game. Let's say you can forego Breastplate and you can go into a Relic Dagger, for example. So your build down here, instead of going Breastplate, you would go into your Relic Dagger, then you would go Breastplate, Shoguns, and then last Stone of Binding. You can do that too, and I like that a lot. But with her, Relic Dagger isn't as important as it is on Ares, so you can forego it. But if you do want to make sure that you have your blink up, you blink to get their beads, for example, and then you have your beads up again to blink to them again, so you can set up for your team, then you definitely should go Relic Dagger earlier in the game. But if you don't, and you want to have your Breastplate on sooner rather than later, then you can just go Breastplate, Shogun, Stone of Binding, and your Relic Dagger, and that would be your final build. You can only buy 1 glyph, so you can't buy Relic Dagger. I do think Breastplate of Determination on Athena is a lot better, seeing as they buffed it. And then finally, for your last 2 items, I'm sorry, not your last 2 items. I meant to say, for your selling your starter item, you're going to go into an Ethereal Staff. With Sands of Time, you don't want to keep this. It's not good. Not only that, you're overcapping your CDR, so this isn't all that great. This is basically just for your early game. And outside of that, upgrading it into Pendulum of the Ages or Alternate Timeline, although can be good, is generally not that great. So you do just want to sell Sands of Time a majority of the time and go into Ethereal Staff. Most of the time, if you are building Sands of Time or potentially Conduit Gem in your Guardians, you're just going to want to sell this. Currently in the state of jousting, as you can get your starter items online. So you would sell that for Ethereal Staff just to be a little bit more tankier and a little bit more damage. And then finally, for your honorable mention items, I do want to talk about, we're going to talk about Pridwin, or Heartseeker, Heartward. Messing up my words. I already said it, Pridwin. Pridwin is going to be your other item that you can think about as your honorable mention. You can go instead of your Breastplate, for example. It's the only item you would be able to switch this out for. Now, the problem with Pridwin is that Pridwin is a staple on Athena in Conquest, just due to how much utility you have with Athena in Conquest, seeing as Conquest is a giant map and you're just using your ult across the map to get to where your allies are, and you do it all the time. You're always using her ult. In Joust, you're not. And not that this isn't a bad item on her, it's very good and synergizes really well with her ult. The odds of you using your ult effectively when compared to Conquest is just not all that great, which is specifically why I go Breastplate instead of Pridwin. I highlighted this earlier. Pridwin isn't that great on her in Joust. Not a bad item. You can still go. If you're going to do some niche plays, then absolutely go use Pridwin if you're going to somehow use your ult. But generally speaking, you're not really going to be using this. So this is an honorable mention, but generally speaking, I like going into your Breastplate more often than not. And with that, that is your general Athena build.
All right, and next up is Atlas. Atlas is one of the more bannable guardians in Joust, and for good reason. He is a very, very, very good pick for any type of team comp for the most part. His kit is pretty OP in the fact that he just has a lot of natural damage. His one is really good poke and a slow, lots of good pullback potential with his two. His two is essentially a mini Fenrir pull in itself, so it's really, really obnoxious to go up against. He gives people some movement speed in his three, and his ultimate is a really, really good shred ability. So overall, Atlas is has a lot of good tools in his equipment, and I'm going to teach you guys how to build him. So first, you're going to want to go into an axe to kind of go into his heavy base damage, tier 1 axe, and then you're going to go into tier 1 prophetic cloak. Now, prophetic cloak is very good on him, specifically because of his one. He got his one very easily. You can get lots of good prophetic cloaks stacks extremely fast, extremely easily, and you get that mitigation off of it and everything. It's just a very good item for Atlas specifically. And with that tier 1, you're going to want to go into, you're not going to have enough gold for Chalice. You'll have around 250 left, so you're probably going to want to go into two health pots and 2 mana pots, so you can have some sustain both health wise and mana wise, since you're not going to have a Griffin Wind Earring this early in the game. And eventually, you're going to want to upgrade when in one of your next backs. You're going to want to get a chalice, so you can have that for the rest of the game. But you're going to try to go and upgrade that prophetic cloak as soon as possible from that tier 1. You're going to try to get right into that, and then once you have that, try and get those stacked up. Your next item is going to be an Oni Hunter's Garb for that MP5. Those mitigations, they synergize very well between Prophetic Cloak and Oni's mitigations as well. So you're going to be really, really tanky early on, and then that'll fix your mana problems as well. Next item you're going to want to go is in a Glad Shield. Glad Shield's going to be even more proc heavy with your base damage plus axe. It's going to be procking a lot whenever you use any abilities, giving you extra damage and some cooldown. And next up, you're going to go into a Pridwin, primarily a Reverent Pridwin, so you have some survivability. And that's just to give you some more tankiness, even more cooldown, and being able to use your ultimate more often and being able to be healthy while you're using your ultimate for that shred. And finally, last item, we're going to go into a Stone of Binding, since you proc it very well with between your 1, 2, and your 3, and your ultimate, I believe it procs as well. You're going to be tanky, healthy, and you're going to be doing even more damage to the enemy and helping out your team as well. And then finally, you're going to go ahead and upgrade your Sundering Axe or you're going to do your Warrior's Axe into a Sundering Axe, so you get those health procs and chunk damage off of your abilities on enemy gods. Now, some honorable mentions that you could potentially go. You could get rid of Stone of Binding and go into a Spirit Robe instead if you want even more cooldown. And you could also switch out Gladiator Shield for, depending on if the situation calls for, you can go into a Midgardian Mail for enemy ADCs. You could go into a Spectral Armor if they're building crit. If you have an ADC of your own on your own team, you can go into a Shogun's instead of Oni Hunter's Garb. So depending on what the situation calls for, you can switch around these items a bit. As long as you're padding your stats between your physical and magical defense, anything will be fine for the most part. Oh, and you could also go an E-Staff instead of Stone of Binding at the last item. And you could also go a Divine if they have a lot of healing, and also just because he does a lot of good damage, and the extra flat pen and damage overall just helps his kit out. Plus his one procs Divine's electricity passive very, very easily. Like very, very easily. So Divine's actually a sleeper pick on him. You can go that last item as well. And yeah, that's your Atlas build.
All right, now we have Bacchus. Bacchus is a very, very good god in Joust, arguably one of the best gods in Joust. He just has so much setup, peel ability, as well as just pure fucking damage with him. So he's very one of your go-to gods if you want to climb ranked, for example. Definitely better in Joust than he is in Conquest. He has very good setup, like I said, with his belly flop, and then his 3 is a very good stun, and his ult does a lot of damage. So with Bacchus, we're going to go straight into our starter items. Now, one starter item I do like to go on him is Sands of Time. Now, this is obviously preference. You can go Warrior's Axe too. Warrior's Axe is really good with him as well. Preferably, I like going Stanza Time just to give you that extra damage as well as cooldown, and a little bit MP5, as he does use a lot of MP5 as well. But again, Warrior's Axe is just as good too. So for the sake of this, we're just going to go Warrior's Axe. Then we're going to go into our Tier 1 Earring. And then we're going to go into our Bow, as we do like to have that cooldown on him. Then we're going to go into a Health Chalice, as you have enough gold, and that will be your start. After this, we're going to go into a Gauntlet of Thebes. He's not very good at stacking Prophetic, so Gauntlet of Thebes is going to be your go-to cookie cutter tank items for you and for your team. After this, and because we have here Earring already in this build, as you can see, we can actually just go into a Manticore Spike. Manticore Spike is really good on him. You've already got Tier 1, so you should be able to upgrade this really quickly, and that will be your Manticore. It will be in this part of the build. It'll be first up for your Gauntlet. But he does proc Manticores really well. Not only that, it does have health, MP5, and a decent amount of physical and magical protections. His passive, it does drop a Manticore Spike when you hit them with the hard crowd control ability, which he does have in his 2 and less reliably in his 3, but still counts. And as Bacchus, you are doing a lot of damage, so even more damage with Manticore Spike is going to do you really, really well. So a very good item on him. As you'll see, he is very good at doing your hybrid type of items. After this, we're going to go into a Pridwin. Pridwin is really good. Actually, I'm just going to skip Pridwin. We're going to pretend like, because there's not enough space here, as you can see. You're definitely going to want to go into a Reverent Pridwin, in my opinion. Now, you can go Glorious just to do even more damage. But if you do want to make sure you are still tanky, but if you are able to do a bunch of damage while not having to worry about being killed, for example, let's say that you're not dying at all and you feel like you need to do more damage, then of course go Glorious Pridwin. But this will just be a proxy for the idea that you do want to go tankier with your Guardians. From there, we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding, very similar to Manticore Spikes. It does have a lot of, excuse me. Okay, so I just coughed. But Stone of Binding, like I said, very similar to Manticore Spikes, does have your very hybrid type of protections. It does have 35 of each protections, and it does have health. On top of that, very similar to Manticore Spikes, it does have a passive based on a crowd control ability, primarily with your 2 and your 3, and actually your ult, as it does do a intoxication, where you're basically trembled. It's a variation of trembled. But you're able to proc Stone of Binding with the flat pen a lot, so you're doing even more damage with Bacchus with the Stone of Binding. So these are going to be basically your core items here on him, as I think that the more hybrid build for him is very good. Like, again, you can go a lot of different items with Bacchus, but I do like going this build because you are very tanky while also doing a lot of damage. And then finally, we're going to go into an Ethereal Staff. Very, very cookie cutter for mages, or guardians, I'm sorry. With this build, you only have 20% CDR, which is why I preferably like to go Sands of Time. Early in the build, you do have 30% CDR, or you will after you get your Pridwin, with Sands of Time, as you are also doing more damage. But again, if you want to be tankier, you can go Warrior's Axe. Now, there are some items that or honorable mention items I do want to go over, and that is the first one. We're just going to go ahead and list these out. Glad Shield, a very underrated item, I think, on him. Glad Shield does a lot of things for him. It does have physical penetration, and it has a passive that makes you do even more damage, as you can see, and it does give you a lot of cooldown as well. Preferably, I would get rid of your Manticore Spikes for this item, but just again, it's an honorable mention. You can always think about going. And then after that, we do have 2 more items. We have Shoguns, and then we do have a Chronos Pendant. Now, one item, if you're going to go the build of the Warrior's Axe, as you can see, you have 20% cooldown. You can sell your Warrior's Axe for a Chronos Pendant, and at this point, you min-max your cooldown. Not on top of that, you get a little bit more damage, and you have a passive that gives you even more cooldown. Now, you are a little bit squishy in this build. As you can see, you don't have too many protections, but this is not right. It doesn't count Gauntlet Thebes. You're going to have 200 of each protections. A little bit more in physical. You probably have 230-ish, and then you'll probably have 210 magical with this build, seeing as you do have a lot of a decent amount of protections, I mean. But then again, you are also going to be a little bit squishier. So you can do that. And then, of course, if you're going Sands of Time, you would also go into your Chronos Pendant as well. But generally speaking, if you're going Warriors Axe, you do want to keep this. But then again, if you are, you have a Hunter on your team, you can go ahead and get rid of your Manticore Spikes, for example, and go into a Shoguns, as this will supplement your team better. Let's go ahead and put that in order so it can be more clear. Instead of, with this build, Warriors Axe, Gauntlet, and then you go into a Shogun's Pridwin, Stone of Binding, Ethereal Staff. And then that would be for your team as well. If you have hunters, you do want to make sure you are helping them out, as Shoguns does give them attack speed, and it gives you a little bit of cooldown too. So you have 30% cooldown with this build, so it works out really well too. So these are your other 3 items. Otherwise, your Warriors Axe, you're going to upgrade into a Sundering Axe, and if you are going to go your Sands of Time, for example. Sorry, I'm still sick. If you are going to go Sands of Time, for example, you do want to make sure you always sell this. You do not want to upgrade this. So you do always want to sell this into either your Chronos Pendant or something, like these other items that you could also go Shoguns, Glad Shield, or other items like that. But if you are going Warriors Axe, you do want to make sure you keep that and go into your Sundering Axe. And one last time, we're going to go over the general build, as there are a lot of items that just we're going around here. So Warriors Axe, this is your general build. Gauntlet, Manticore, Pridwin, Stone of Binding, Ethereal Staff, and then you would eventually go into your Sundering Axe, and these are your other situational items if you want, and that is your Bacchus build.
All right, and next up is Cabrakan. Cabrakan, another Guardian that is extremely dangerous to most team comps. He has a lot of damage, lots of good lockdown potential with his ultimate, plus his 1-2 combo. Plus, he just got a rearrange change with his 3, being able to tremor a lot more. I got a little bit nerfed to 4 seconds, but it's still a massive buff overall. Plus, his 2 doesn't really cost any more mana anymore, just about 10, plus it regains mana anyway. Overall, Cabrakan's at a really, really good spot. He was already in a really good spot before the patch, but he's even better now. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to lean into that damage by going into a tier 1 axe. And also for your recipe, you're going to go bow, so you get those cooldowns on each ability. You want to level that up and go bow, so you get the cooldowns. And then after tier 1 axe and bow, you're going to go into a tier 1 earring so that you could have some good mana sustain early on, because he's very mana hungry. Although his 2 does give him mana back, you're going to feel it better with a tier 1 earring. Plus, you're going to be going into an item in that tree anyway, so it's good to go that. And with that, you should have 300 gold left, so you're going to go into a chalice for the rest of the game. You're going to have some health regen, and that's going to be your start. Next, your first full item you're going to want to go into is a Gauntlet of Thieves. You're going to want to go this over Prophetic, because Cabrakan is actually one of the worst stackers of Prophetic, just because of how vulnerable he is to actually get stacks. You have to really be like in auto attack range in order to stack it up at all with any of his abilities or auto attacks. So you're going to want to go Thieves, because it's a lot easier to stack and it gives you very similar stats overall. Next up, after Thieves, you're going to want to upgrade those earrings into a full Manticore Spikes. Manticore Spikes is very good on Cabrakan. Procs on his 1, plus you can pick them up almost immediately after, and then you can hit him on the 2, and his 2 also procs Manticore Spikes, so he's got 2 abilities that proc Manticores. I believe his 3 does as well, but I'm not completely sure of that. I'm going to have to go back into the game and check that out, but his 1 and 2 definitely does for sure. And then his ultimate does a lot of damage as well to capitalize on all that damage you're already doing. Next up, you'll want to go into Relic Dagger. It's going to give you some cooldown, lots of good health and stats, and specifically Relic Dagger, because Cabrakan is one of the gods where you want to go Blink on him, and the more you have Blink up, it's an initiation tool. So the more you have Blink up, you blink in, you use your ultimate, your 1-2, so you can get some kills, and then if they have beads, you can burn their beads, and then because you have Relic Dagger and you have your relics up faster than they have their relics coming up, then you can keep on harassing them with your Blink and your abilities. So Relic Dagger is actually very, very good on Cabrakan. You don't really see people building it too often, but it's almost core to him and to a few other Guardians that use Blink as well in their kits. So after that, you're going to want to get some more tankiness and cooldown, and that's where Pridwin's going to come in. You're going to have 30% cooldown thus far. You're going to have even more tank stats with this, and you're going to want to upgrade that glyph into a Reverent Pridwin. Now you can either do that, or if it calls for it, if they have like ADCs on the enemy team, or if you want to be more tanky when you use relics, you could even opt out of upgrading Pridwin. You can instead upgrade into one of the glyphs for Relic Dagger, either for the attack speed slow, or whenever you use a relic, you get more protections. Either one's fine, depending on what the game calls for. But overall, you can never go wrong with Pridwin going Reverent Pridwin. And then finally, for even more tank stats and to help out your team with even more damage, because it procs on all 3 of your base kit abilities, a Stone of Binding, so you get even more tankiness, you do more damage. And this is overall going to be your Cabrakan build. And then lastly, you're also going to upgrade that tier 1 axe into a Sundering Axe, so you can get the health procs, you can chunk people and get your health back and more damage. And this is overall going to be your Cabrakan build. Now, some honorable mentions. If you wanted to lean more heavily into damage Cabrakan, you could omit Stone of Binding and or either Relic Dagger and Pridwin, one of those 2 items, and go into 2 damage items towards the end. You can either go into an E-Staff and a Poly, specifically Poly because it procs on your 1, and you can proc it often with how low your cooldown on your 3 is now, but especially because of the 1, it procs with the ability of the 1 because it counts as a basic attack. So Poly is a must-have in there. You can go into a Spear of Desolation, like I said earlier, E-Staff. You could even potentially go into a Soul Reaver. There's a lot of different items you can go last if you're going more heavily into damage. But if you are going to do that, then you probably get rid of either Stone of Binding and or Pridwin or Relic Dagger. But for the most part, the original build that I said earlier before, where you're fully tanky, most of your damage is coming from your base kit and Manticore Spikes and Axe, is going to be the base kit that you're going to be going, the base build. And that is your Cabrakan build.
All right, now we have Cerberus, the dog himself. Now, he's not the best god in Joust, let alone Conquest. He is better in Joust than in Conquest, but he isn't the best god. He does have very good damage in his 2 and his 1. They recently nerfed his 2, but they did buff his 1 a lot too, and that does a lot of damage. So he's a very damagey type of god, which is why you do see him in the solo lane a lot in Conquest. But overall, if I were to put him somewhere, he's probably somewhere towards the mid-tier to good section of of all the guardians. He isn't the best, he isn't the worst, but he is a solid pick if you want to pick him. Usually you see him at the lower ranks of the ladder in Joust, but he's still a solid pick. But with him, with his passive is what I meant to go over. His passive is a heal steal, very similar to an item known as Tainted Steel, which happens to be the first item that we're going to be going into most of the time with him. It just synergizes too well with his kit. Not only that, its base stats in Tainted is pretty good too, even if they don't have healing. Which in reality, you will always have healing in the game. If you do have a hunter, for example, you'll usually go as a hunter a lifesteal item like Devos or Aussie, so Tainted Steel will be also good for that. Now you can go Warrior's Axe as well if you want to. Let's say they literally have 0 healing, then you can just go into Warrior's Axe. But still, Tainted Steel is a very good item to go into for Cerberus. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Similar to a lot of the other Guardians, we're going to go into a Tier 1 Earring. He does use a lot of mana. And of course, we have enough gold to get our Chalice of Healing. And then finally, with him, we're going to go into Bow for the cooldown. And that is your start. With him, he does not proc Prophetic really well. So instead of that, we're going to go into our Cookie Cutter Gauntlet of Thebes. And then from there, he does have a little bit of a change in build. Like I said, he's a very damagey type god with his 2/1 ult and his 3. He doesn't really have a lot of consistent peel, which is kind of why he's not the best in Joust, due to him not having great setup outside of his ult or peel. So with him, he's going to be very similar to your Bruiser type Guardians. That's why he's, like I said, he's good in solo lane and Conquest. So with that, we're going to go into a Breastplate of Valor. Breastplate of Valor is very good, especially with its new buffs, like I stated earlier. And with that, we're probably just going to go straight into a Breastplate of Determination. That also got a buff too, which is really good for him as well. From here, we're going to go into an Onis. Like I said, he's very damagey. He's kind of similar to Artio in the fact that you're using him for damage in terms of a Guardian. So Onis is going to have a little bit of mitigation. You're not going to go Prophetic, so you're not going to stack or cap it, but you will have that. If not, and you want to be more team-oriented, you can always go into your Shogun. Shoguns is very good as if you do have a hunter, and you can also do that too. But if you don't have a hunter for some reason, let's say you're going double tank, then Oni's is going to definitely be good for you there. And then we're going to go into a Pridwin. He procs Pridwin really well as he brings in his ult. If you don't know, which I don't know how you wouldn't, you basically bring them to you very similar to an Ares ult, where you drag them, you knock them up, and bring them to a specific location that you want to, usually towards your enemies, unless you're peeling, of course. But Pridwin is very good on Cerberus as he does proc that a lot. Now, I said you can go into the upgraded version of Breastplate of Determination, but again, you can go into Reverent Pridwin if you wanted to. It depends on what you want in terms of how you're playing him. If you want to be more tanky in terms of protections, you can always go into Breastplate of Determination, because at max stacks, you can get up to, I believe, 56 of each protection, as well as movement speed when you fully stack Breastplate. Or you can go into Reverent Pridwin, which just gives you a giant health shield, which also makes you tanky, but it's a little bit different than protections as it's just a shield. Either way, going into either glyph is very good. So that can just be on a case-by-case basis if you want to, pick Breastplate Determination or Reverent Pridwin. That is up to you. But for the sake of this build, we're going to stick with Breastplate Determination because it recently got a buff. But after Pridwin, we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding procs really well on 3 of his abilities. His 1 being a stun, obviously, procs that. And his 2. The middle of his 2, if you do not know, makes it to where they slow the enemy down, which does proc Stone of Binding. As it's not hard CC, it is successfully hitting a guy with a crowd control ability, which falls under that. And then his ult also is a crowd control. So Stone of Binding is really good on him as well. If you haven't sold your Mystical Earring, you obviously go on your Stone of Binding. And that is basically your Cerberus build. Now, you will upgrade your Tainted Steel, but like I said, this will be dependent on who you're going up against. If you're going up against a 2 physical team comp, then you're going to go into a Tainted Breastplate, as this does have 70 physical protections. So I'll put this here. Or you can go into a Breastplate of, or I'm sorry, not Breastplate. I believe it's called Amulet. Tainted Amulet, you can go into Tainted Amulet as this does have 75 magical protection. So depending on which team comp you will go up against, will dictate which one you would probably prefer. And that is your final build. Now, as some honorable mentions, he doesn't really have too many because he is basically like a warrior. Only other item that I can really think about right now is probably Ethereal Staff. Ethereal Staff making him tanky while also doing more damage. But basically, this is your build. Your Tainted Steel, Gauntlet, Breastplate, Onis, Pridwin, Stone of Binding, and then upgrading into either Breastplates or Amulet, depending on team comps. And then obviously you do have your E-Staff if you want to go instead of your Stone of Binding for even more damage. But other than that, that is your Cerberus build.
All right, and the next god is Charon. Charon is a newly released god and a very, very good god in both Conquest and Joust, especially Joust. He's usually banned. He's pretty much S tier at this point. Definitely is down bad for some nerfs at this point. Really needs some nerfs at this point. While he's still buffed up and really good, I'm going to teach you guys how to build him and squash your games, okay? So, first item we're going to go into is a tier 1 axe. He procs it very well, really good damage early game, and then the upgrade for it later on is going to be very good as well. So you're going to go tier 1 axe, followed by a tier 1 Griffinwind earring, so you have some MP5 sustain, and you're also going to be upgrading it later on. And you're also going to go into a Chalice of Healing for the rest of the game, so you can sustain yourself. And that's going to be your start. You are also going to go into a Bountiful Bow for your recipe, just because the cooldown is very good on Charon, as it is on pretty much every god in the game for the most part. So that's going to be your recipe, that's going to be your start. And the first item you're going to go into is a Prophetic Cloak. Prophetic Cloak, specifically because Charon's abilities, when he first came out, a lot of people said that he feels like a mage more so than a guardian because of how many projectiles he has, and that can be more closer to the truth. His 1 and his 2 are easily throw out abilities. You can just throw them out for long range. You can throw them out for poke, and you can get your Prophetic Cloak very stacked up very well. Plus, his auto attacks as well are. You don't have to get really close up and personal to auto attack them. You can stay at a distance and auto attack them for those Prophetic Cloaks. So he procs that very easily. Definitely want to go that over Thebes. Next up after that, you're going to want to go into a Pridwin so you can round out that cooldown. Oh, before you go into Pridwin, I just made a mistake. You're going to go back and upgrade your earrings into a Manticore Spikes. You're going to want to upgrade that into Manticore Spikes because his 1, which is his silence, along with his 3, his dash or his surfer ability, when you hit enemies, it gives them a root, and both of those abilities, including his ult as well, so 3 of his abilities, 2 in his base kit and 1 of his ult, they all proc Manticore Spikes, so they all synergize with him very well, so you definitely want to go into a Manticore Spikes after you build Prophetic Cloak, and then after that, you're going to want to go into a Pridwin, preferentially go into a Reverent Pridwin, so that when you ultimate, you'll be healthy, and then your Stone of Binding after that, for even more tankiness and damage on both your 3 and your 1. And Charon is very good in Joust in general because of his silence in his 1, his chase down ability with his 3, and then obviously being able to keep your team extremely healthy with your 2. Whenever you auto or use an ability, you just have a shield up. So that Reverend Pridwin is going to help out a lot with just your tankiness, along with having it synergize with your 2. And then after your Pridwin and Stone of Binding, lastly, you're going to go into an Ethereal Staff so you can steal even more health. It'll synergize with your passive, which basically just gives you a crap ton of health by the end of the game. And you're going to be stealing it away from others and basically doing more damage. And to round off the build at the end, you're going to upgrade your starter into Sundering Axe so you can proc damage. You can proc it very easily with your auto attacks and your 1 and your 2 and your ultimate. So this is going to be your Charon build for the most part. Now some honorable mentions if you want to change some stuff up. Your last item, E-Snap, you can change that into a Spirit Robe if you want more cooldown and more mitigations, more protections. You can also go into a Chronos Pendant instead of Pridwin potentially, or one of the other slots as well if you don't mind overcapping on cooldowns, because Chronos Pendant on his ult and the rest of his abilities is very good. And that is your Charon build.
All right, we now have Cthulhu. Very similar to when I talked about Cerberus, he is a very damagey god. All of his abilities do damage, and not just any type of damage, they do a lot of damage. So now he's not the greatest in Joust, unless you are a Cthulhu main or you are really good with him. He's not the worst. He's very similar to Cerberus. I'd probably put him in a similar tier. He can be very oppressive with his ult, along with his abilities. I'd probably put him a little bit, or he probably is a little bit better than Cerberus in my opinion, but not the greatest in terms of setup and peel and for helping your team comp in terms of guardians as they go. But with him, he's gonna be doing damage, so we're gonna go straight into an axe. We're gonna go into an earring because he does use a lot of mana, seeing as you are throwing out a lot of your abilities. And then from there, we're gonna go into our Chalice of Healing, just to have that online. And then we're gonna go into a Bountiful Bow, seeing as we're gonna be throwing out our abilities a lot, so that extra cooldown is gonna be great. Now with him, he procs Prophetic really, really well. He does have a lot of ranged abilities, and with his 1, it's a decent range, but his 2 is a really far range, so you can actually just throw it out and just get a random proc, or a random stack for your Prophetic Cloak. His 3 is a very long dash, so that is very good too, and his ult, obviously, he just throws out a bunch of abilities basically across the map, so he's very good at stacking Prophetic Cloak, so definitely want to do that instead of Gauntlet. And from here, we're going to go into a Breastplate of Valor. As you'll see, a lot of the gods that, or a lot of the guardians that go more damage oriented, you're going to see that they're going to be going Breastplate of Valor a lot more often than any of the other traditional guardian items like Sovereignty or a Heartward Amulet, for example, or even a Shoguns, even though he still can go Shoguns. But you'll see that a lot. Now with him, he does not do really well with Pridwin. It's not very good. I think his Pridwin actually goes off as soon as his ult ends, which is very bad. And even if it did stop, or even if it did start as soon as he ulted, it's not very good either way. So we're going to go into an upgraded glyph of Breastplate of Determination, just because of its recent buff. It is very good. And then after that, we're going to go into an Oni Hunter Garb to basically carve out your mitigations from here. I did forget to mention this before, but I mentioned it in my Assassins and my Warriors. So if you don't know that, or if you haven't seen those videos, then I don't know what to tell you. But essentially, when you are going either Breastplate of Valor or an item like Oni Hunter's Garb, where you are going a physical and a magical, you do want to make sure that you buy either a magical first if you're going up against 2 magical, 1 physical team comp, or you want to build a physical item like Breastplate of Valor first if you're going up against a 2 physical, 1 magical team comp against 2 magical or 2 physical, 1 magical team comp. Basically, you just want to buy your items in order based on how much damage you think you're going to be taking from the enemy team. So you will flip-flop the items, Breastplate of Valor and Oni's Hunter's Garb, depending on which team that you're going up against. But for the sake of this, we're just going to go into a Breastplate into Oni's. And then after that, we only have 2 item slots left, but we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding is very good on him as well. It does proc off of, actually, Cthulhu's passive is basically insanity. So you basically make them, or you fear them, depending on how many, I believe, whenever you hit them with your abilities. Once you reach a certain amount of stacks, you are able to fear them with your 1, for example. But he does proc Stone of Binding really well with his 3, his 2, and his 1, depending on if you can get your ult stacked, or your passive stacked. And then obviously in his ult, he does have a knockup in his 2, so that is very good. Stone of Binding is be really good. Now you can also think about Manticore Spikes. Manticore Spikes is another item. I'll actually just put this here since I'm already talking about it. Manticore Spikes is another item that you can think about going in terms of like an honorable mention, but that is going to be your 5th item, your Stone of Binding. And then after that, you're going to sell, if you haven't already, your Mystical Earring, and you're going to go into an Ethereal Staff just to be even more tankier while doing some more damage based on their health. And that is basically your Cthulhu build. After we go into our Warrior's Axe, we're going to go into our Sundering Axe for that upgrade. And then that will be your rounded out build. Now, I already talked about Manticore Spikes being a honorable mention. Now, there are 2 other honorable mentions I like to go over. We do not Glad Shield. We have Glad Shield, and then we also have Chronos Pendant. Now, these 2 items I do like to go with Cthulhu. Now, one thing I will say, if you are going to go Glad Shield, you're obviously going to take it, you're going to substitute it for Breastplate of Valor. So instead of that, for example, this is how the build would go. Let's go ahead and start this over. So obviously Warrior's Axe, Prophetic Cloak. Then you would go into your Glad Shield, Oni Hunter's Garb, and then Stone of Binding. And at this point, why I put Chronos Pendant here is because instead of an Ethereal Staff, you can go into a Chronos Pendant, for example. So if you want Chronos Pendant here, you do max out your cooldowns. You do have 40% cooldown along with the Chronos Pendant passive. So this is a very, another good build that is very good. Glad Shield, obviously, very similar to Artio. You do use a lot of abilities, so Glad Shield will be good here as well. But normally speaking, like I said earlier, the normal build you would want to go is Warrior's Axe, Prophetic, Breastplate, Oni's, Stone of Binding, and Ethereal Staff, and then upgrading into your Sundering Axe at the end. And with that, that is your Cthulhu build. All right, now we have Fafnir. Fafnir is a pretty good Guardian. Recently has gone in, or recently has been a lot better than he once was. Beforehand, when you had your double tank meta where there weren't really a lot of hunters, and actually hunters seemingly were the worst class in Joust, he really wasn't good, seeing as his kit is basically revolved around having an ADC, whether it's a mage or a hunter. And now that since we're in a meta where ADCs are literally in every single team comp, as that's the meta now, just your traditional team comp, tank, mage, hunter, Fafnir is obviously just going to be a little bit better. Not the best, but he is a lot better. And so with him, we're going to go into, we're not going to go into an axe, actually. Dissimilar to a lot of the other gods and guardians, he doesn't really proc Warrior's Axe enough to where it's worth it. Now, it does give you a little bit of tankiness, but the utility that Warrior's Axe gives isn't going to be all that great on Fafnir. So with him, I like to go into a Sands of Time, just to give a little bit of MP5, a little bit of power and cooldown, as Warrior's Axe passive really only procs on his 3 and his 1, and all of the times your 1 isn't always going to hit. So with Fafnir, there's only really 2 abilities that proc it, so it's not all that great. Of course, you can still go it, but in my opinion, I think Sands of Time is going to be better for you. We're still going to go into a tier 1 earring. You don't have to, since you do have MP5 with Sands of Time, but I still like to go into earring. If you don't want to go into earring because you have Sands of Time, you can just go into a straight, your first item, which will be Gauntlet of Thebes. But with this build, I still like going it, as it's still a very safe start, as you'll go into your Chalice, and then of course you go into your Bow, and that is your start. Like I said, you can go into a first item Gauntlet instead of your earring, but first item we're going to go into is Gauntlet of Thebes. Does not proc Prophetic at all. or doesn't stack it really well at all. So definitely Gauntlet is going to be your go-to. And then after that, we're going to go into a Shoguns. With Fafnir, you always go Shoguns if you're playing Fafnir, as that's basically what you are there for, is to help your hunter. Set up for your mage and your hunter, as well as give your hunter attack speed, as your 2 gives an attack speed buff, as well as bonus damage. So every time you auto, you do bonus damage, and you also give them attack speed buff. So Shoguns is going to synergize really well with that. So these 2 items are going to be always core on him if you're playing Fafnir. Now, a lot of times, if you're playing Fafnir and you don't have any hunters or ADCs, you can go something else. But generally speaking, please don't play Fafnir unless they have like a hunter, or unless you have like a hunter. But you can still go him if you want. But that is just my preference. After that, we're going to go into a Pridwin. Pridwin actually is surprisingly really good on him. I originally thought that this item didn't really work well on him. I assumed that the Pridwin passive only worked as soon as your ult ended, as he does turn into a dragon and has another set of abilities. But after watching some videos, I am playing him a little bit. Pridwin actually procs twice on him. When you ult, you get the initial proc from Pridwin, your shield. But as you deform, you also get another potential shield. Now, there is a caveat here. I will state that this is a 45-second cooldown in Pridwin, so you have to wait 45 seconds after your Pridwin has gone. It will take a little bit of upgrading your ult. As you can see, when you upgrade your ult, the duration goes up. So once you get to, you have to upgrade it 4 times, which is the only caveat with this build. So once you upgrade it 4 times, your ult, then you'll finally be able to get the maximum amount of benefits. As you can see, you'll have 50 seconds in your duration for your ult, and then for your Pridwin, like I said, is 45 seconds. So you can get 2 Pridwin procs, which is really good on him. But either way, if you don't get 2 of the Pridwin procs with your ult, it's still very good on him, as you still get that shield right away. You'll get the Pridwin shield. You'll most likely jump onto somebody with your 3, stun them, and your Pridwin shield will go off and do even more damage. Now with him, you can go either or. You can go Reverent or Glorious. It really depends on what you want. But for just simplicity's sake and for being tanky as your Guardian, we're just going to go with Reverent Pridwin for that glyph. After this, we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Now with Stone of Binding, he has a lot of CC, basically in his 1 and his 3. His 1 is a stun, so it will proc Stone of Binding, and then also his 3 is a disarm in his human form, or his what is he, a dwarf in his dwarf form. And then obviously in his ult, you can proc off his 1 and his 3 again. So Stone of Binding is going to be really good for you too. Now you can go, I'm just gonna do this here like I did last time. With him, you can go into a Manticore Spike, as it also procs really well off of him, and you can use your stun, and you can probably pick up your Manticore Spike on the way over, especially when you're in your dragon form. So Manticore Spike is there as well too, if you want to go that as well. But Stone of Binding is just your generic way of getting up protections, your health, and having a passive that will always do well for you and your teammates. And then finally, we're going to go into a Spirit Robe, just to cap out that cooldown. Now, of course, with your starter, you are going to have overcap your cooldown with this build. As you'll see, you'll have 20, 30, and with your Spirit Robe, you'll have 40, but you will have 50 with your Sands of Time. So do keep that in mind. Your last item will be Spirit Robe. This will be your final build. This won't be your final build. This will be your full build. But lastly, what I like to do with Fafnir, instead of upgrading your starter item, very similar to a lot of your gods that go Warrior's Axe, I do like selling your Sands of Time, which is very good, seeing as you are going to be able to min-max a lot of your... You're going to be able to min-max your cooldown while also going into another item, as I don't think the upgrade for Sands of Time is all that great for a lot of Guardians. So instead of that, there's another item you can go. You can go into an Ethereal Staff. Ethereal Staff is going to be your placement for most, or your generic item for most of your Guardians for damage-wise. So you can go into an Ethereal Staff. You can sell your Sands of Time for an Ethereal Staff. and that will be your final build. Of course, you can go into a Manticore Spike too if you want to, and honestly, you can go earlier in the build if you wanted to replace it and replace it earlier in the build and go build the rest of your other items that are up here. But that right there is basically it. And I think that covers most of what Fafnir does. He's basically your god that helps out your ADCs and sets up for a lot of the for your damagey backline, but also does a lot of damage in his ult. Arguably one of the best gods in terms of transitioning ult, similar to Cuchulainn. But other than that, I think that is your Fafnir build.
All right, and the next guardian up is Ganesha. Ganesha is an extremely good guardian in both Conquest and Joust, especially Conquest, but also very good in Joust. Very annoying god to go up against. You have to play around his silence all the time. He's very good with his silence, being able to lock down people's abilities. Excellent peel ability, so that nobody can attack your backline. If they're real low, you can shut that down. Also gives your teammates protections. Your Dharmic Pillars is a lot of damage, even if you don't build any power. It has a lot of damage, lots of good setup and lockdown. His dash is really good at keeping people staying, at chasing people down, getting out. And all of his abilities, his 1 and his 3, do a lot of damage on their own. So very good damage god, very good peel, pretty much a traditional support. You definitely want to play around your ohm a lot of the time, hold it and use it when you have to, specifically for when people are trying to kill your backline and for trying to stop people from dashing away so that you can secure kills. Another thing Ganesh is really good with too is that his passive allows it to where you can gift your kills and also minion kills over to your teammates so you can help them stack up their items, their stacking items quicker, and also to gift them kills as well if you happen to get the last hit so that then they can get fed even faster. So Ganesha, overall, very, very good, both Conquest and Joust. And I'm going to teach you how to build him right now. You're first going to want to start off with a tier 1 axe. He procs axe very well, both early and late game, with both his 1, his 3, and his ultimate. Does a lot of damage. And after that, you're going to want to go into a tier 1 earring. You can have some MP5, and you're also going to upgrade that a little bit later on as well. Next up for your recipe, you're also going to want to go into a bow for that cooldown. And then you're going to want to get yourself a chalice of healing for the rest of the game and for the beginning of the game as well, so you can have sustain. And that's going to be the way you start the game off. Next up, first item you're going to want to go into is a Gauntlet of Thebes. You could also go Prophetic. You can stack it up with Ganesh with his 1 and his 3 as well, and his autos obviously. But the safer bet, you can just go into a Thebes. You stack it a lot easier than Prophetic on him. So that's going to be your first item. Your second item is you're going to go ahead and finish up that Manticore Spikes. You're going to upgrade the earrings into a Manticore Spikes. Ganesh is a character similar to Horus, to where he can actually create a Manticore Spike using his dash, his 3, and then while you are in the middle of the animation, if you're lucky enough, you can stand right over it and pick it up, and then on the last tick of it, you can actually proc the Manticore Spike. So, in an ideal world, you could use your Ohm or use your Ohm, get a Manticore Spike from that, pick it up, and then if you land your 3, you can get that initial Manticore Spike, and then potentially get a second on the same ability on the last damage tick of your 3 after you create that Manticore Spike and pick it back up again. So Manticore Spike's actually very good in Ganesh, very good for damage, along with the Axe proc, it's very good. Next up after that, to get some cooldown online, also because it synergizes really well with his kit. For more protections, you're going to go into a Reverent Pridwin. Whenever you ult, you're going to get a big protection shield, and also that cooldown helps out a lot. And then after that, you're going to want to go into a Spirit Robe to get even more cooldown, some mitigations if you're getting CC'd, and just some more tankiness overall. And lastly, you're going to want to go into a Relic Dagger. It's going to make you more tanky from the health. It's going to max out your cooldown. And because Ganesh is more so a traditional support, you're going to want to get your relics up all the time so you can help out your teammates all the time. So Relic Dagger is going to help you out with having your relics up most of the time. And that is going to be your Ganesh build for the most part. You're going to also upgrade your axe into a Sundering Axe for even more chunk damage and healing. That's going to finalize the main build. Some honorable mentions, you can also go instead, you can opt out of a Relic Dagger and go with Stone of Binding instead, for even more tankiness and also to help out with your team's damage. You could also, even for your own damage and tankiness, you can go last item Ethereal Staff. But for the most part, Relic Dagger I think is the best thing you can go in that spot, especially since you already have damage coming out of Axe, Manticore Spikes, and Pridwin passive. So, and this is going to be your Ganesha build.
All right, we now have Geb, a very, very, very good god in Joust. He's a very standard god or guardian in terms of setup as well as peel ability. He actually has a lot of different interactions with his 3. He's very similar to, a little bit similar to Ganesh. He can silence sort of type of way. For example, if somebody has a Fenrir, or you're going up against a Fenrir and your Fenrir ults somebody, you can use your 3 while in Fenrir ult and it cleanses them, allowing them to not be picked up by Fenrir anymore. So a lot of good peel as well as setup with his 2 and his ult, and has really, really good mobility with his 1. So you basically have everything you need. He does surprisingly a lot of damage with his 1 and his ult. So I'm sorry, his 2 and his ult. So very, very good. He's probably one of the safest but best guardians if you want to pick him up as well. So with him, this is the first item, our first starter item that we're going to be talking about, which is Conduit Gem. Now, you can go Warrior's Axe on him, which is fine, too. But Conduit Gem specifically for his 2. Not only does it give you MP5 and mana and a little bit of damage, the passive also just gives you more damage. So if you use your 2, which is basically an unmissable ability, you're always going to get the passive of Conduit Gem, allowing you to do even more damage. Now, you can do the same thing with Warrior's Axe as well. You can interchange with Warrior's Axe if you feel like it. But I do think Conduit Gem gives you a little bit more damage. Other than that, we're going to do standard build. We're going to go into an earring. Again, like I said, if you're not going into a Warrior's Axe, you're going into an item like Conduit Gem or a Sands of Time, and it does have mana or MP5, then you can forego Mystical Earring. But again, this is just the safest option, because we're still going to be able to get our Chalice, making you have a lot of health in the beginning of the game. And then finally, we're going to go into a bow for the cooldowns. With him, he does not stack Prophetic that great. He can, but he's not the greatest with it. So we're going to go Gauntlet of Thebes. And then the next item we're going to go into is a Relic Dagger. Very similar to what I said about Ares and a little bit about Athena. He is very, very good at using Blink and setting up for your team. So a lot of times you blink, you ult, and as soon as the stun from your ult goes away, then you use your 2 to knock them up, basically getting the freest setup for your backline to do damage. And with that, a lot of the times, very similar to Ares, they do like to beads it. So Relic Dagger's passive, allowing you to have 40-second cooldown. That little extra buffer time, allowing your blink to come up, will allow you to basically secure your ult the second time around if it doesn't the first time around, for example. So he's really, really good with Relic Dagger. You want to make sure you get that on this build. Again, you can wait later into the build, similar to that Ganesh build, but it's all a preference in terms of that. It does make you a little squishier, so you can just go later in the game. But next item, we're going to go into a Shoguns. This is primarily for your hunters. If not, and you don't think that you will get value out of Shoguns, let's say you don't have a hunter, for example, then of course you just go into a Heartward Amulet instead. But we're going to go ahead and get rid of that, and we're going to assume that you are going to have a hunter, as more likely than not, you're going to. And after that, we're going to go into a Pridwin. Pridwin is very good. We're going to go into a Reverent Pridwin. Really nothing much needs to be said here. He ults, he gets a Reverent Pridwin shield, making him even more tankier. On top of the shield that you can give to somebody else or yourself, potentially. It's very, very good and synergizes really well. If you haven't already sold your Mystical Earring, we're going to sell that. And we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding. I meant to say this earlier, but Manticore Spikes is really good on them too, as he does proc it with his 2 and his ult. But I do think Stone of Binding is a little bit better on Geb. Just for basically setting up for his team, as although he does do a good amount of damage, he's really just there for setup and peel. So Stone of Binding, I think, is better on Geb than Manticores, but you can always do that. So let's go ahead and just put that there for a honorable mention, as you can go that And then that is basically that for this build. Now, like I said, similar to Sands of Time, you do want to make sure you sell Conduit, as I don't think the upgraded versions are as valuable as Sundering Axe is for the upgraded for Warrior's Axe. If you do go Warrior's Axe, of course, you go upgrade in Sundering. But here are your honorable mentions or slash items that you would sell or that you would go for after you sell your Conduit. One item is Spirit Robe. Spirit Robe. Now, with this build, you are going to overcap a little bit on CDR, but like again, I said before, just because you overcap on something, as long as it's not egregious, it should be fine, seeing as you do have a lot of protections and you do have that passive for mitigation and CCR. So just because it does overcap doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad. So we're going to go Spirit Robe as a potential for our last item. You can honestly go Manticores if you want to as well. But generally speaking, I do like to go Ethereal Staff for selling my starter, just to get that extra little bit of damage as well as tankiness in its passive. And with that, I think that is your get build.
All right, next Guardian up is Jormungandr, a bit of a sleeper pick in Joust. Not a traditional support by any means. He's usually found in Conquest in the soul lane for good reason, because he's more damage oriented. So he doesn't provide a whole lot of peel for your team, opposed from your 3 being a knockup. But for the most part, you're basically going to be spitting on people with your 1, creating a bunch of pools, getting in them, using your 2 for extra damage, and using your ult to chase down enemies. So he's very much a damage oriented Guardian, essentially more like a warrior than a traditional Guardian. So and I'm going to teach you how to build him right now for Joust. First up, you're going to want to go into a tier 1 axe for that, because he procs it very well with his pools, and he can proc it very well with his 1, plus he's damage oriented already, so that you're just going to lean more into that. Next up, you're going to want to go into a tier 1 prophetic cloak, and with that, you'll have around 250 gold left. You're going to want to go into 2 health pots and 2 mana pots for sustain early game. The next time back, or when you have enough gold for it, even after you either before or after your first item, it's really up to your discretion. You're going to want to pick up your Chalice of Healing for the rest of the game, so you have sustain. And your recipe in the beginning is going to be Bow. Similar to a lot of the other gods, Bow, the cooldown is just very good, especially on Yorm. And that's going to be the way you start off the build. Now, first up, your first full item, you're going to want to upgrade that tier 1 prophetic cloak and turn it into a full-fledged prophetic cloak. It's interesting to note for Jormungandr that his auto attacks, since they're different than any other god in the game, to where it's like tick damage over time, it's not a traditional auto attack. It doesn't really have item effects proc on it. It's the same for prophetic cloak. So your auto attacks actually do not proc prophetic cloak stacks. The only way you can proc prophetic cloak is through your abilities, through your 1, 2, 3, and your ultimate. Now that might sound bad, which it kind of is a little bit. However, Yorm can kind of get away with it because his 1 is very easy to hit from far away. It's one of the most long range projectile abilities in the game. And also, I believe it procs when people walk into your puddles as well. I'm not completely sure about that, but I think that's how it works. But even if it doesn't, you can still get away with it, because you can spit on people, and then you can turn invisible with your 3 and get prophetic cloaks sneakily through that as well. So, works well with him. You're going to get cooldown and mitigations from that, and lots of protections, and helping out your team with that. It's a great first item for him. Next up, you're going to want to go into an Oni Hunter's Garb. Yorm's very much up in everybody's grill, so those MP5 and mitigations and protections are really going to help him out. Plus, it's going to help your mana issues pretty much for the rest of the game. Next up, you're going to want to get more cooldown, some more mana, and a potential glyph option. You're going to go into a Breastplate of Valor for your physical defense. Very good item on Yorm, very tanky, very much. The glyph items actually got buffed recently, so they're actually very good right now, especially the defense-oriented one. So a very good choice for Jormungandr. Next up, your fifth item, you want to go into a Stone of Binding, because it procs very well with all of Yorm's abilities, essentially. Just extra damage for yourself and your team, and extra health and defense. Overall, very good item for Jormungandr. And then finally, last item to round things up, to lean even more into the damage and to make yourself healthier, and also to steal health from enemies, you're going to go into an Ethereal Staff. And then lastly, you're going to upgrade your starter into a Sundering Axe so that you can steal health and chunk enemies' health from far away and even close up. Now, this is your traditional build on Jormungandr. You can pretty much go this into any team comp and you'll find varying levels of success. Pretty much, I think this is the most optimal build out there. Some honorable mentions if you want to. He does proc Manticore Spikes fairly well, so you could build that tier 1 earring in the beginning into a prophetic cloak if you want to. I personally think that he is fine with this build, the original build that I gave out, but if you wanted to go Manticore Spikes, that works. Another build that you can go, or another item you can switch out for potentially Breastplate of Valor or Stone of Binding, you could go into a Glad Shield. Glad Shield's going to give you some cooldown. He procs all of his abilities a lot, so he's good at getting the Glad Shield damage procs from the passive of it. When people walk into his puddles, it also procs Glad Shield, so it's a very good option for damage as well if you wanted to go into that. And also, if you wanted to replace Stone of Binding and or E-Staff as well for more cooldown, you could also go into a Chronos Pendant. All of these are very good options for Jormungandr, but the original build is going to be the build for Jormungandr that I'm giving you.
All right, and we have Khephri now. Not a very good god at all in terms of any game mode, actually. Has a very good ult, a very great ult in terms of reviving an entire fucking teammate. But not that significant otherwise. He just doesn't do damage. And in Joust, you're as a guardian, you're gonna want to make sure either you have like a crazy amount of peel or setup, or you're going to want to have a mixture, preferably with a lot of damage as well as setup and peel. He just doesn't do damage, and outside of that, his appeal and his setup isn't all that crazy. But if you do, for some reason, want to play this this god Khephri, we have a very odd build. He doesn't use a lot of items well, but with him, he doesn't proc Warrior's Axe really well at all. I mean, you can use his 3 and his 2, and I guess technically his 1, but you don't really want to. With him, you want to make sure you have cooldowns on him. I think being able to have setup very quickly, as well as using all of your abilities like over and over again, is something you're really going to want to pay attention to. Seeing he doesn't have a lot of damage. With that, you don't really need MP5 with him, but if you do, we can just go into an earring just to be safe. After that, we're going to go into a Chalice. Chalice of the Healing, and then very similarly, we're going to go into Bow. I don't think there's any other god that goes any other recipe, basically, currently. After that, he is not good at stacking Prophetic, so we're going to go, obviously, into a Gauntlet of Thebes. That'll be your first item. And then from there, we're going to go into a very traditional type of build with him. We're going to go into a Sovereignty, and we're going to go into a Heart Ward Amulet. Now, with him, you can go into a Shoguns. Shoguns is very good. It's very supporty, too. But otherwise, you're going to go into Heart Ward, as you don't need mitigations with Onis or anything else. Obviously, you would switch these around, basically, when, depending on your team comp, like I said earlier, if you're going against 2 physicals, you're going to want to go up again. You're going to want to buy Sovereignty. If you're going up against 2 magicals, you're going to want to go buy Heart Ward or Shoguns. But for the purpose of this build, we're going to do Sovereignty into Heart Ward. And then after that, we're going to go into a Spirit Robe. Spirit Robe is going to make you more tankier. It's going to have cooldown, as this build has basically 0 cooldown if you're going Heart Ward. So making sure you have a little bit of cooldown with this build is going to help you if you do go Shoguns, which a majority of the time you should. But I do like going Heart Ward on him as is traditional. But if you do go Shoguns, then you will have 30% cooldown with this build, which is very good. And then last item, we're going to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding is there for your CC with your 3 and your 1, as this does proc it with those abilities. And then last item, you would be selling your Mystical Earring for your Stone of Binding. I did not click Spirit Robe. So that is your final build. Now, because he doesn't have a lot of items, there really aren't that many things you can build for him outside of that. I mean, the only other item I can think about is a Relic Dagger, but even Relic Dagger isn't all that great outside of maybe getting Shell a lot sooner. You can go Manticore Spikes if you want. That's not really good on him, though, because the damage that you you pick up from the Manticore spikes is meaningless as your Khephri. I mean, you can maybe get the Manticore spikes for your teammates, but outside of that, you have Relic Dagger, and that's basically it. If you want to play Khephri, I guess go ahead. You would sell your Sands of Time. If you want to, you can obviously do a cheeky play where you upgrade into an alternate timeline if you wanted to. But if you don't want to do that, you can just sell this and go into either like a Heartlord Amulet or a Relic Dagger or an item from this build that you haven't gone into yet. Otherwise, you can go into an alternate timeline, which actually I'll just put here because he literally has no items that he builds. So if you want to go upgrade into that, you can go drop alternate timeline. It does give you protections as well. But other than that, that is your Khephri build.
All right. Now we have Kumbhakarna. Kumbhakarna is kind of a middle of the road god for the most part in Joust and in Conquest. But for Joust, he kind of fits the role for a traditional support and a damage support pretty well. He's kind of like in the middle of that as well. So the way you're going to want to build him is you're going to want to go into a Sands of Time first item. He doesn't really proc. You could also go Axe as well. He does proc it decently enough, but I prefer to go Sands and to sell it off later on just because I believe this build is just a little bit better for him. So you're going to want to go into a Sands of Time and then a tier 1 earring. You're going to have a lot of mana early game and a little bit of cooldown early game as well. And with that, you're also going to go into a chalice and also for your recipe, a bountiful bow. And this is going to be the beginning of your Kumba build. So the Sands of Time, the earring, you're going to have plenty of MP5. You have the Chalice of Healing. If you can't afford that yet, if I'm mistaken, you can't buy it yet, then you just get 1 or 2 healing and then mana pots, and then you buy it on your next back or after your first item buy. But for the most part, you definitely want to get that Chalice online pretty soon. And that's going to be your start. So the first item you're going to want to get is a Gauntlet of Thieves. Kumbha can get Prophetic, but Gauntlet of Thieves is a bit better for him. He stacks it a lot easier. Prophetic, he doesn't really stack it that crazy compared to some of the other characters in this class. So Gauntlet of Thieves is going to be your best bet for your early game tankiness. Next up, you want to go into a Manticore Spikes from that earring. So you want to upgrade the earring into a Manticore Spikes. And this is going to help out you and your own team's damage because you're going to get a Manticore Spike every single time you land your 3 and your 2. Then next up, you're going to want to go into a Pridwin, a Reverent Pridwin, to round out some cooldown and make yourself even more tanky. And this is really good on Kumbhakarna. Next up, you're going to want to go into a Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding, again, every single time you land a slow, or your 2, or your mez, or even your ult, you're going to be proccing Stone of Binding. It's going to help out you and your team's damage, and also you're going to make yourself tankier with your health and protections. And finally, your last item, you're going to want to go into a Spirit Robe, just for some more cooldowns and some mitigations for yourself. And then finally, you're going to have to actually sell. It's not actually advantageous to upgrade the mage starter because as opposed to that, as a tank, you'd want to sell that and instead go into an ethereal staff. This is actually kind of better for you because you're going to be making yourself tankier and also stealing away health from the enemies as well. And this is going to be your total baseline Koopa build. This is pretty much good in almost any setting. Now, some honorable mentions that you can shift around in case if you have any ADCs in your team. You could switch out, say, Manticore Spikes for a Shogun's Kusari. Just build Thieves first and then go into Shoguns and then Pridwin. You can also potentially go into a Relic Dagger. Once you sell off your Sands of Time, you can go into a Relic Dagger instead. That way you'll make yourself even tankier with the HP. You'll round out your cooldown to 40%, and you'll be able to be more in line with a traditional support because you'll be able to use your relics more often for either offense or defense, depending on which relics you get. Kumbha usually ends up going into more defensive relics, such as Shell and Meditation Cloak, but you could also go into Blink potentially, Blink Ult, Blink Mez. I've seen some other things like Horrific for slowing down the enemies. Those are all good options, but that's the whole point of a Horrific or a relic dagger, that is, in order to be able to get those more often for your team, for more setup, and being able to help out your team more often. So, and this is going to be your Kumbha build.
All right, we have, I would say, the best guardian, one of the best gods, if not the best god in Joust. We have the OP fucking turtle man himself. We have Kuzenbo. Do I have to say anything about him? This man is the most disgusting god in this game. Game mode, at least. Not in Conquest. He's still good in Conquest, but not as good in Joust. Preferably, or usually in the higher ranks, he is a menace. So a lot of times I ban him. If you're in the lower ranks, this is a good time to pop out the Kuzenbo if you want to carry games. Especially with this build I'm going to give you, you can absolutely 2v3 an entire game. I've had it to where I've gone up against a Kuzenbo and the one guy didn't play at all. Like, he was really bad and he didn't do anything. But they had a Kuzenbo and we still lost the game because he was Kuzenbo. You literally can't do anything. His 1 does a lot of damage, has slow. His 2, once his 2 gets leveled up, if you know about High to the Nemean line back in the day, that's basically what this is. Its damage taken is 35%. So if you're an auto attack god, you literally cannot auto him when he has this up. Otherwise, you're doing 35% of the damage to yourself. So he's basically a hunter counter. His 3 makes it to where you don't even need to have power as long as you have like a wave or a buff camp. You can 3 somebody into that and you do a fuck ton of damage, not even needing damage. And his ult does just a crazy amount of damage anyway. So he literally has everything that you need. One thing to note is that he does have mitigations, making him even more tankier, stacking up to 15%. And with high-res recently buffing the mitigation, or I'm sorry, not buffing, changing the mitigation to where now item mitigation stacks with ability mitigations within a certain god. Now you can have mitigations in your build, and you can have mitigations from his passive. So you can almost have 50% mitigation just with Kuzenbo, so that's also why he's fucking OP as well. But enough of that, we're going to get into the build. We're going to go into an axe. He does proc axe really well, as well as make him a little bit tanky. With him, he does use a lot of mana early game. So you're going to want to make sure to go Mystical Earring. And then after that, we're going to go into a Chalice. Go into our Chalice, and after that, we're going to go into a Bow. One thing I did forget to mention, though, is that I forgot that his 2 also reduces cooldown per hit. So you're also able to essentially have infinite cooldowns with him. I meant to highlight that. So that's also another thing that makes him fucking OP in Joust. Not that anyone really is surprised. We're going to go into a prophetic cloak. Prophetic cloak. He is very good at stacking prophetic cloak, as he can throw out his 1, he can use his 2, his reflect can get stacks as well. So you can just get free stacks by someone hitting you. You can use your 3, your ult. You get stacks really, really easily. So you definitely want to go prophetic cloak. And the next item, and I think the only god that can get away with this on a regular basis, is the greedy start, going into a prophetic cloak and a gauntlet of thieves. Now, the reason you don't normally want to do this is because that it, like I said, it's very greedy, meaning that you're going to be very, very susceptible to snowball, seeing as you need to stack these up to get it. As Gauntlet doesn't give you a lot, it gives you literally nothing. It just gives you health and HP 5 at the beginning and doesn't give you anything else until you stack it. Prophetic Cloak is a little bit different. It does give you a little bit of protections, health, and cooldown, but mainly you're buying this 2 stack. And if you're buying these 2 items, as long as Warriors Axe, you are open to Snowball, generally speaking. But with Kuzenbo, he can get away with it because he's Kuzenbo. So you can definitely go into your Prophetic Gauntlet, and you should be really, really tanky. After that, we're going to go into Aoni's Hunter's Garb. Like I said earlier, he does have a lot of mitigation in his passive, just getting up to 15% in his passive. And then also with Oni Hunter Garb and Prophetic Cloak, once that gets stacked, you're basically getting 21, I believe, 7.5. I'm sorry, not 21. You're basically getting 20 mitigations. This gives 12 to 7.5. So basically 20 mitigations, just generally speaking, all the time. So meaning that you're going to get at all times for the most part, unless you lose your stacks with Kuzenbo, you can get up to 35% mitigation just because. So that's why you want to go Oni's Hunter's Garb. It gives you MP5 as well for that matter too. And then after this, we're going to go into a Pridwin to get some more cooldowns. Preferably Reverent Pridwin, but you can honestly go into Glorious Pridwin to do even more damage, seeing as you're going to be right next to them anyways. So for this sake, let's just go Glorious Pridwin, just because you can. This will give you 30% cooldown, so you have a lot of cooldown on top of your 2, giving your cooldown a lot as well. So after that, we're going to go into an Ethereal Staff, just make you more tankier and do even more damage. And this build absolutely fucks. I don't know. I really wish Hi-Rez would do targeted nerfs, because I think Kuzenbo is the first on the menu to fucking get nerfed, because this is absolutely ridiculous. And then obviously for our upgrades, we're going to go into our upgrade starter item. We're going to go into our Sundering Axe. Sundering Axe will be your top off if you get there, and it'll be incredibly good. Now, there are a lot of things you can do with Kuzenbo. I'm going to name off a few honorable mentions for him. One I like to talk about is Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding is really good, as it does really well with his 1 and his 3. And honestly, instead of an Ethereal Staff, if you want to be tankier, you can just go Stone of Binding instead of Ethereal Staff if you wanted to. But I think this is a really good item on him. And unfortunately, with this build, there just isn't enough room, because there are so many good items on him. But again, you can honestly change Stone of Binding with Ethereal Staff, and you know, it's still good. After that, we do have another item. We do can go into a Spirit Robe. Now, Spirit Robe isn't the greatest, as he is basically getting max cooldown, or I'm sorry, max mitigations with Onis and Prophetic. So this is probably the weaker one for honorable mentions. But again, like I said, just because you're overcapping on things doesn't mean that it's bad. So with Spirit Robe, you are getting more protections, and you are getting that maxed out cooldown too. And then after that, we do have some flat pen items. You can go into a Spear of Desolation. Spear of Desolation makes it to where you have even more cooldowns. On top of that, you can even do more damage to the backline gods. So if you can somehow get to the backline, which isn't hard on Kuzenbo, you can blink, use your 3, and you're doing even more damage to Spear of Desolation. If you get an assist or a kill, you're now reducing your ultimate cooldown by 6 seconds and your others by 2 seconds. So you're just spamming even more cooldowns. And with this, you can you'll max out your cooldown reduction as well. So Spirit of Desolation is there too. This is a proxy for Divine as well. You can go Divine instead of Spirit if you wanted to, if you need anti-heal, for example. And now you can go Manticore Spike. It's not as good on him, but you can go Manticore Spike if you really want to. I'm not going to put it there, but that is an option, as well as it does proc on his 3 and his ult, and I think it is pretty good as well. But generally speaking, you're going to go this greedy build right here. Prophetic, Gauntlet, Oni, Glorious, Ethereal into Sundering Axe, and you literally don't die. You can't, they can't do anything to you. It's like literally impossible. You use your 2, Hunters can't do anything, and you basically just kill them whenever you want. Obviously, Ethereal Staff can be switched out for any of these items. If you want more flat pen for a backline, you go Spear. If you want to be tankier, even though I don't think you need to be with this build, you can go Spirit Robe or Stone of Binding. And Stone of Binding is really good as well. And with that, that is your cringe Kuzenbo build. All right, we have Maui. Not a particularly great god in Joust. He's kind of subpar. He's not even really middle of the road. He's just really not that great. He has great setup in Conquest, and with his ult is almost one of the best ults in the game in terms of Conquest. And he still is really good in Conquest. I think a little undervalued in Conquest. In Joust, he just doesn't bring all that much to the table. He does have a really good ult in terms of damage, but outside of that, he just doesn't do it for damage-wise. You know, considering things like Bacchus, which, in my opinion, is just a better Maui. But with that, he does have some playability. So with that, we're going to go into build for him. He doesn't now. For his starter item, you can go Warrior's Axe, as it does. He can proc it semi-well with his 3. His 1, sorta. It's a very skill shot based ability, so it's a little bit harder to do. His 2 doesn't do it at all. So, but you can go Warrior's Axe as well. I like going Sands of Time, seeing as you want to make sure you have cooldowns for him, seeing as you're basically just set up. You're not doing much damage at all. With that, you're going to be using a lot of mana, so we're going to go into a Mystical Earring, a Chalice, and then we're going to go into Bow for the cooldowns. Now with him, he can stack Prophetic okay. So if you want to go Prophetic, you can, but I do think that Gauntlet is a lot more consistent, seeing as his abilities, like his 1 and his 3, are pretty easy to dodge. So Gauntlet of Thebes is probably what you're going to want to go most of the time. After that, he is, like I said, he does do a decent amount of damage, but he is basically your setup god. He's a very traditional type of guardian. So we're going to go into a Shoguns. If you don't have a hunter, you can go into Heart Ward. Heart Ward is there too for you as well. Other than that, we're going to go into a Pridwin. Pridwin is very good on him. You want to go Reverent Pridwin. Pridwin is really good on him. His ult is probably the best thing about him. It basically brings all the enemies to you. So then as you are there, you can ult, use your 3, stun them, come down, and your Pridwin proc should be able to do some damage as well if you are able to do that. But on top of that, you do have a lot of, you have a big shield with him too. So it's very good on him as well. It gives you cooldown as well. With him, I think Stone of Binding is very good on him. Manticore Spikes isn't really great on him, as I don't think he does have a lot of damage in his kit that warrants that, but Stone of Binding does help out your team, as he's a very traditional type of god. So being able to proc this with your 1, your 3, and your ult in its passive will help you and your teammate do even more damage. So Stone of Binding, I think, is another core item on him that you should build after that. Then finally, you're going to want to go into a Spirit Robe. Spirit Robe will cap out your cooldown here. Now, you are capped with this build, but like I said earlier, a lot of the times when you build Sands of Time or Conduit Gem, you're always going to want to make sure to sell Sands of Time, as I don't think the upgraded starters are all that great, well, compared to Warrior's Axe, for example. But Sands of Time isn't all that great for Guardians. So with that, we have this build right here: Gauntlet, Shogun's Reverent, Stone of Binding, Spirit Robe, and then you sell your Sands of Time starter. Now, there are a few of the items that you can go. One item that I generally like to go is Ethereal Staff. Now, he doesn't have a lot of priority in damage, but even gods that don't, like for example Ganesha, although he does do a lot of damage, he's not primarily there for damage, but he still can build an Ethereal Staff. So similarly to that, Maui's going to be selling. You're going to be selling Sands of Time for your Ethereal Staff just to be more tankier and do more damage. Other than that, we do have one other item that we'd like to talk about here is Manti. Like I said earlier, it's not that great on him. He doesn't do much of it, anything with it, but since he doesn't have a lot of other items you can really build on him, besides maybe like a Sovereignty, I guess, but you don't really need that because you're going to be going Pridwin, Gauntlet, and Stone. You'll have enough Fizz D anyways. Manticore is really the only other item I can really think about that would be semi-good on him, as a lot of damage items are kind of mid. So that's generally your build. So Sands of Time, Gauntlet, Shogun's Reverent Stone, Spirit Robe, and then sell your Sands for an Ethereal Staff. And that's what your that's what your build would look like. And with that, that is your Maui build.
All right, and now we have Sobek. Sobek is very good in Joust, arguably better in Joust than he is in Conquest, mainly because of his pluck ability. His 1 is insane at basically just taking somebody out of position, bring them right into your team comp. As long as you're playing it effectively and correctly, you're not, plucking a full health front line into your back line and getting them killed. As long as you're not doing that and you're plucking the squishies, or you're plucking people at opportune times in the right direction so that you can annihilate them and take out their beads. Beads burn them, and sometimes even people try to beads your pluck in the middle of it, and they'll still get plucked anyway, and then you'll waste their beads anyway, and you can still kill them. Overall, his pluck, his entire kit is very good, especially his pluck. His 2 is a good knockup, his 3 is good healing and damage, and his ultimate is a great CC immunity, lots and lots of damage for that. And you can chase down people with your ultimate as well, because it's a slow and regain mana. Overall, Sobek's a very, very good Joust Guardian. So the way you're going to build him is you're going to want to go into Tier 1 Axe. He goes very well into Axe because he's got a lot of damage abilities that he can just throw out. And then you're going to go into a Tier 1 Earring for that MP5 early game, and then into a Chalice of Healing for the rest of the game, Sustain. And you're also going to go into a Bountiful Bow for your recipe for cooldowns, and that's going to be the way you start off this build. Next up, your first full item you're going to go into is a Gauntlet of Thebes. You can obviously go into a Prophetic as well. Sobek actually procs it pretty well with both his 1 and his 3 whenever you go try to get a long range pluck, or if you just walk up and hit somebody with your 3 or even your 2, you can pocket pretty well, but you stack thieves up easier with him, so that's a safer bet, and it's what I would usually go instead of prophetic. Next up after that, you'll want to go into a Manticore Spikes. You want to upgrade your earrings into a full Manticore Spikes. This is going to be good for your damage because you proc a Manticore Spikes every single time you land a pluck on your 1 and on your knock up in your 2, so it's very good for that for both yourself and your team. Next up after that, to get yourself some cooldown and some tankiness and some survivability when you ever use your ult, you're going to go into a Reverent Pridwin next up. And then after that, you're going to go into a Stone of Binding. This is going to make yourself very, very tanky, both health and both protections. And then the passive is very good because you proc it on your 1, 2, and your ultimate. You're going to be doing more damage yourself and be helping out the team, especially when you land that pluck, because you're going to be making it to where their protections go down, and you're also plucking them into the middle of your team, so you can all in them. And then finally, the last item you're going to want to go into is an E-Staff, Ethereal Staff, so that you can steal people's health away, so you can make yourself tankier and just do a bit more damage. And then finally, you're going to upgrade your Tier 1 Axe into a Sundering Axe, so you can capitalize on that increased healing and chunk damage. This is going to be your standard Sobek build that you can pretty much go into almost every comp. Some honorable mentions that you can go is you can replace Stone of Binding for a Spirit Robe if you want more cooldown and a bit more mitigations. However, I will preface that Stone of Binding is an extremely good item on Sobek because of just how many times you can proc it in your entire kit. So I would prefer you go Stone of Binding. 20% cooldown is doable. But if you do want more cooldown, you can go into a Spirit Robe, or another honorable mention you can also go, as opposed to potentially either Stone of Binding or E-Staff, you can go into a Relic Dagger. Relic Dagger is going to make you healthy via giving you more health, so you'll be a bit more tanky in that aspect. And also, if you go Blink, which is a very, very good relic on Sobek, Relic Dagger is very good for winning you games. It's a very aggressive item for that. Also, if you even go defensive items, Relic Dagger is very good on Sobek as well, just because you'll be able to spam your relics, whether it's Blink or wanting to make your team more survivable or slowing down the team with a horrific. Whatever relics you're going, Relic Dagger is very good on Sobek. Preferably going Blink so that you can Blink one somebody if they think they're safe out of your range, and they're actually not because you have Blink. It's a very good combo on Sobek so you can pluck somebody out of position. And also, you could potentially, another honorable mention you can go is potentially a Shogun's, again, if you have an ADC on your own team that you want to help out. And those are pretty much all of the honorable mentions that come to mind. Potentially even a Glad Shield if you want to do even more proc damage, but for the most part, you really want to go either Spirit Robe, Relic Dagger, or Shoguns, depending on the situation that you want to get into. And yeah, that is going to be your Sobek build. All right, and now we have Sylvanus. Sylvanus is, to me, a pretty underrated god or underrated guardian in Joust. He's not really played that often. He's usually kind of looked down upon, but I actually think he's pretty good if you know how to play him pretty well. His 2 got buffed a few patches ago to where now you can actually clear minions with it. It actually attacks minions now. It's also a very good healing ability and damage ability over time. His root is pretty good. If you're good with using his 3, you can really pluck people through walls in Joust and like get them from far away. And then obviously his ultimate is kind of the inverse of Jeb, to where it's kind of like a knock up instead of an instant stun like he has. It does damage over time. So he does a similar combo where you're definitely gonna want to go Blink as a relic in order to blink in there, ult to root somebody, grab them, etc., lock them down. So Sylvanus is pretty good at being an offensive god, being able to initiate for your team, and also being able to support your team by healing them and also peeling with the roots, the ult, and also the grab as well. So in order to build him, we're going to start off with a Sands of Time for early MP5 and some cooldown. You could make an argument to go Axe, but I do not personally think that it is very good on Sylvanus in comparison to going more of a traditional support build for your team. So you're going to want to go into a Sands of Time instead. And then you're going to want to go into a Tier 1 Gauntlet of Thieves. And then I believe you don't have enough gold in order to buy a chalice yet, so you're going to want to go into some mana pots for early game and also some healing pots as well, maybe 2 and 2. Actually, scratch that. You can go into healing pots, and then you can go half pots because you'll have enough mana with your Sands of Time early game, so you can get double healing early game and a little bit of mana. And then you're also going to go into a Bountiful Bow for your recipe for added cooldown. Again, probably the most busted recipe of them all, even though the rest of them got buffed. And this is going to be the way you start off the game with Sylvanus. Next, and also whenever you back the next time, before or after your first item, you're going to want to go into a Chalice of Healing just for the rest of the game to have some sustain. It's pretty important, especially in Joust. Now, with that out of the way, your first item you're going to want to go into is upgrading that Tier 1 Gauntlet of Thieves into a full Gauntlet of Thieves. Again, you could go into a Prophetic Cloak, but personally, I think Gauntlet of Thieves is easier to stack on him and in comparison to Prophetic, so it's the safer option. So you're going to go into that for early tank stats. Next, you're going to go into a Shogun's Kusari. It's going to help with your area of effect auto attacks and also with your teammates. For the most part, hunters are running rampant in Joust as of current meta, so Shogun's is most likely going to be your best bet for yourself and for your team. It's going to also help out with some mana issues and your cooldown. Next up, you want to go into a Lotus Sickle, again for some more cooldowns, some added health, and for tankiness for both yourself and your team. It's going to synergize very well with your 2 because you can heal a lot of people around yourself, and also it gives yourself protections along with the Lotus Sickle protections. So it's a very good item for that. It synergizes extremely well with Sylvanus. Next up, you're going to go into a Pridwin. It's going to give you a bunch of cooldown, basically maxed out cooldown at this point. And whenever you blink ult or whenever you just ult, you're going to go into a Reverent Pridwin, so you get added protections. You could also make an argument to go Glorious as well if you want added damage, but I personally think that Reverend is better as of right now. And then next up, to finally round out the build, you want to go into a Relic Dagger. Now, you are overcapping with this, I believe. However, Relic Dagger is going to give you plenty of health stats, and its passive is extremely good for what you are going to be doing as an initiator support, because you're definitely going to go blink. You can blink ult too, etc., to be able to initiate and burn the enemy team's beads, so that when you burn their beads, your relics will come up way quicker than their relics will come back up, and you'll be able to get them while their beads are out. And then finally, you're going to sell your Sands of Time because it's not really worth upgrade on him in comparison to going into a Stone of Binding, because Stone of Binding procs very well with both your 1, 3, and your ultimate. And for the most part, this is going to be your standard Sylvanus build in most cases. Now, some honorable mentions that you can go, potentially getting rid of Shogun's Kusari. You could go into a Spirit Robe, just like change the order a bit, go Lotus Sickle a bit quicker and Pridwin, and then go Spirit Robe later on. Gives you added protections, etc., etc. Later down into the game, you could also, instead of Stone of Binding, when you sell your Sands of Time, you could go into a Rod of Asclepius for some added tank stats, some movement speed, a little bit more damage, and also to be able to help your team out with healing. Now, you could go that at the late game when you sell your starter, or you could even go in that Shogun's Kusari slot, whichever you prefer. Or another honorable mention that I personally like to go on Sylvanus, it's a bit of a spicy take. You could even go into a last item Rod of Tahuti. I know it's a little bit different than most of the other Guardians because it's your only damage item for the most part, and it's just like flat out like Rod of Tahuti. The reason being is because for some reason, Rod of Tahuti's passive also works on healing characters to a lesser degree than Rod of Asclepius. So that added damage when you get someone down into a 60% threshold, it also works when your teammates are at a 60% threshold and you're healing them. So you get slightly more healing. That percentage of damage actually converts into your healing, and you heal them for more. It's not as much. It's not really as much as Rod of Asclepius. Rod of Asclepius heals way more than Rod of Tahuti does. in comparison, but it is a slight noticeable difference um, onto your healing. Plus, you can also have it just to surprise them with, oh my god, why is this Sylvanus able to do a crazy amount of damage to me all of a sudden? And it's because of Rod Tahuti. Now that's a bit more of a safety pick. If you wanted to go a bit more traditional and have some damage and tankiness, you could opt out for a traditional ethereal staff. That way you can take away their HP and make yourself tanky. That's the safer route to go. But these are some good honorable mentions, and for the most part, this is going to be your standard Sylvanus build.
All right, and in my opinion, the most underrated god just ever, just out of almost any other god in the game in terms of Joust, at least, we have Terra. Terra, I think, is a high skill ceiling god, as you can do a lot with her. She has a bunch of setup with her 2 and her 3, comparing it with her 1, 2, or 2, 1 as well. She has a lot in her ult. Gives you heal, gives you damage, it gives give allies damage mitigation, it gives even more damage towards enemy gods. So you have a lot of things with Terra, and you can set up so well with her. I'm not perfectly great at playing her. I know how to generally play her. My plan is to get better at her mechanically, but with a build she has a pretty decent straightforward path build. We're going to go into Axe. You can go into a Sands of Time, but generally speaking, I like going Warrior's Axe more often than not on her. From there, you're going to be using a lot of mana on her, and she's very mana hungry. You're going to go into a Mystical Earring to counteract that. And then we're going to go into a Chalice. And then, of course, your Bow, and that is your start. She does not stack Prophetic at all. It's really bad. So you're going to go into Gauntlet of Thebes. And from there, you're going to upgrade your Earring into a Manticore Spikes. She is very good at getting... she's very good at proccing your Manticore Spikes with her 3-1 combo, as you can throw out your 3 and use your 1 to dash, stun anybody who in the area, and let me tell you, that 3 is a giant area, so it's kind of impossible not to. And then, of course, her 2 you can just use as a stun. So that is, you have 2 abilities that proc Manticore Spikes really easily, especially with your 1-3 combo, and you already have your first tier 1 Earring within your build, so you are already going to go in anyways. Very similar to Sylvanus and another god that we're going to be talking about later. We're going to go into a Lotus Sickle for the healing. Lotus Sickle is very good on her. She has healing in her 3, and she also has healing in her ult. So you're going to be able to proc Lotus Sickle all the time. On top of that, it gives you a lot of bloated stats. FizzD, health, cooldown, and movement speed, along with or protections, like I said earlier. So you're going to go into a Lotus Sickle. After that, very similar to to Manticore Spike, we're going to go into Stone of Binding. Stone of Binding is very similar to Manticore Spikes, as you will be able to practice in her 3 and her 2. So you'll be able to not only when you stun them or root them and then stun them, for example, in your 2 or 3, you'll be getting a Manticore Spike doing even more damage. You're going to even be doing even more damage with your Stone of Binding's passive. So it just synergizes really well, especially with her going Warrior's Axe. You're going to be deceptively doing a lot of damage with Terra. And then finally, we're going to go last item, Spirit Robe. Spirit Robe is going to give you that extra 10% cooldown, now allowing you to have 20%, which isn't the greatest. It's really not, but it is doable. And so Spirit Robe is also going to be there for the damage mitigation, as well as some other... as well as protections from Spirit Robe. Now, with her, you're going to want to go into a Sundering Axe. Sundering Axe is very good on her as well. And so that's your basic build with her. Now, one honorable mention, not really an honorable mention, but like a tweak, depending on how you want to orient this build, is Shoguns. Shoguns is going to be really good on her. I think we were going back and forth with Shoguns on whether or not this was core, as I think we were both thinking that Stone of Binding is so good on her and that there isn't really enough room for all of these items. So we did value Stone of Binding a little bit more with Terra just because of her CC and setup and peel. And so we did have to get rid of Shoguns for that. But if you wanted to, Shoguns is very good. Shoguns gives you cooldown. It gives a passive for your teammates if you have hunters. and it also gives you MP5, so it is very, very good. Now you can interchange this for Manticore Spike, that's where we put it, but you can also interchange it for Stone and Binding as well. Either one of these items, as with this, if you did go Shoguns, you will have 30% cooldown, which is a lot of, is a very good amount of cooldown, so definitely better than 20, so Shoguns will be there for that as well. Now, as for an honorable mention, like I said, she's very straightforward. She doesn't have a lot of items or a breadth of amount of items for you to choose from. So other than that, you're just going to go into an ethereal staff, very similar to every other guardian. This one you would go for instead of a spirit robe. But generally speaking, if you're going to go into ethereal staff instead of spirit robe, you're going to want to make sure you have Shoguns so you can have that 20% cooldown at the very least. As 10% cooldown is just not enough. And I believe there aren't many other items for her. So I think with that, that is your Terra build.
All right, and now we have Xing Tian. You don't really see him in Joust too often, and for good reason. He's very similar to Sylvanus and Jeb, where he usually wants to go into a blink, so you can blink ult somebody. Same thing with Cerberus as well, blink, or you can jump in and ult people. The only thing is he does his job pretty decently well. The only thing though is that it's very easy to read him to where he has a very long wind up on his ultimate when he first casts it. So it's a good opportunity for people to use their beads or CC immune ults, or even to just jump out of the way too. It's very hard, or it's very easy to dodge a Xing Tian ult. You'd be kind of skilled to be able to catch the enemy team by surprise in order to actually catch them with it. So it's a bit more of a skill to use Xing Channel and to actually get people in it compared to some of the other picks that do the same thing. But despite that, I still believe that he's actually pretty decent. He's got a good CC in his 2. He's got his hook slam is very good at locking people down. He's able to get good damage off with his 1, as also with his and his 2 and his 3. His 3 is good for chasing people down and also escaping. You'll be able to jump over walls and also be able to jump over twice over. And his ultimate is even good for defense as well if you need a CC immune ult, which it is. So overall, he's pretty good. He's also got a very tanky passive. And the way you're going to build him is you're going to start off with a Sundering Axe, or tier 1 axe, and we're going to eventually upgrade it into a Sundering Axe late game. For chunk damage, very good early game and very good late game. Works very well with this entire kit because you can throw out your 1 and proc on your 3, your 2. Very damage-oriented Guardian, which makes him very good with Axe as well because you can proc it very easily. All right, and then you're going to go into a tier 1 Gauntlet of Thebes, and you're not going to have enough for a Chalice, so you're going to go 1 or 2 health pots and then 1 or 2 mana pots for your early health and mana sustain. And then obviously when you back the first time or after your first full item buy, or even before, depending on your own discretion, you can go into your Chalice of Healing for the rest of the game. And that is going to be your start. Also, you're going to want to go into a Bountiful Bow for your recipe. Pretty much on most of the Guardians, if not all of them, you're going to want to go Bow for that extra cooldown on every other ability whenever it pops up. And that's going to be your start for Xing Tian. Your first full item buy is going to be a Gauntlet of Thebes. You're going to finish off that tier 1 into your tier 3 Gauntlet of Thebes. You could go into a Prophetic Cloak if you want to. He does proc it decently enough, but to me personally, I like to go Gauntlet of Thieves, especially because with the other items we're going to be building later on, you don't necessarily need the cooldown from Prophetic, although the mitigations do help if you want to go down that route. Or we're going to stick with Gauntlet of Thieves for this build. Next full item we're going to go into is a Shogun's Gusari. Works good with himself for MP5 reasons. You're going to have good MP5, you're going to have some good cooldown, some auto attack speed for yourself, and for most likely your teammate being an ADC of some sort, or being able to utilize auto attacks, since they're very prevalent currently in the Joust meta. Next up, to round out your defense and your cooldowns, you want to go into a Reverent Pridwin, also for your survivability, especially when you're blinking in or jumping in and ulting. You want to make sure you don't get fried. So Reverend Pridwin's going to come in handy and help you out with that. Next item, to make yourself more healthy in the health department, you want to go into a Relic Dagger. This is going to round out your cooldown fully, make you a bit tankier in terms of your health, and also because you're going to be using that strat of blinking in and ulting and trying to burn their beads, and then also being able to do it again before their beads come back up. Relic Dagger is going to help you have your relics, particularly your blink and or your other relic up quicker than their relics come back up. So Relic Dagger is very good on the Xing build. And then finally, you're going to round out the build with a little bit more extra damage and some more tank stats for yourself, and to make the enemy team weaker, you're going to go into an ethereal staff to finalize the build. And then, like I said earlier before, you're going to upgrade your starter into a Sundering Axe for more proc damage, some healing, and to just do more damage to them overall. Now, this is the standard build that you usually go on Xing. This kind of works in the most team comps, if not all of them. Some honorable mentions that you can go. You could go into a Spirit Robe if you want to be tankier, have a little bit more cooldown and a bit more mitigations. You could also replace potentially Shoguns for that, or you could also potentially just move everything down. And another honorable mention you can go is a Manticore Spike and or a Stone of Binding. Both of these are in a similar category to one another because they both mainly proc on your Hook Slam and your Ultimate. You don't really get the best benefits out of them in comparison to some other Guardians that can utilize them in multiple parts of their kit. For this, you can only really use it in your Hook Slam and then your ult. So it's not the best utilization, but if it does work, if it does work pretty well. If you wanted to get the Manticore Spike or the extra prot shred out of your 2 and or your ult, it does work. So that is an honorable mention that you can go. Another honorable mention, potentially, because he procs it pretty decently with his 1 as well, and also being able to harass by jumping in and using your 1. You could, if you need anti-heal and a little bit more damage, you could go into a Divine Ruin instead of E-Staff late game, just for anti-heal teams, and also because of the flat pen. That's another potential option. But for the most part, the original build that I said, the original 6 items that I said, that is going to be your Xing build. Okay, and now we have Yemoja. Yemoja is pretty high skill ceiling guardian, extremely good in conquest. Not really the best in Joust currently. However, I do love playing Yemoja in Joust. It's kind of an underrated pick in my opinion. I love playing her. And this is the way I'm going to have you build her. Something unique about her specifically is her Omi, so you don't really have to worry about mana issues. She just kind of gets her own version of mana in her Omi. You don't have to worry about MP5, which means you can build her in a few different ways than normal without having to worry about building MP5. You can spam her abilities pretty well as long as you accumulate your Omi. You can heal your teammates. You can save them with your ultimate, River's Rebuke, and or your Riptide ability, getting teammates out. You can also cut off block off exit ways with your for enemies with your 3 and also with your ult. She's very, very versatile. It's a very high skill ceiling god and very good. However, she's not really played too often in Joust. So the way I'm going to build her for you is this. I'm going to show you 2 builds. One is the more traditional route, and then the second one is kind of an all-around build that I really like going because you get a lot of utility out of it. So the main build, or the safer build, I'd say, the more traditional build, you want to go into a tier 1 axe. She actually procs axe very, very easily, very well with her 1, the bubble strike especially, but even the moon strike procs it very well too. Her 1 procs axe extremely easily and well, and she actually does pretty decent damage for a guardian. So you're going to go into a tier 1 axe, and then go into a tier 1 prophetic cloak. And then with that, you can go into some mana pots. Not mana pots. You can go into some health pots. You do not need mana pots for Yemoja because of her Omi. Then later on, when you back or when you get enough gold, after your first item or even before, you can upgrade into a Chalice of Healing for the rest of the game for sustain. And then also you're going to want to go into a Bountiful Bow. Actually, no, you're not going to go into Bountiful Bow. Similar to Cuchulainn, I just recalled, because of the way her Omi works and the regeneration with her cooldowns, Bountiful Bow actually does not work on Yemoja. So instead of Bountiful Bow, you will go into a Sturdy Stew for the support protections. It's one of the only Guardians that you go this on, mainly just because Bow actually doesn't work on her. So that's going to be your start for Yemoja. So first of all, your first full item you're going to go into is you're going to upgrade your tier 1 into a full Prophetic Cloak. Prophetic Cloak is very good on Yemoja. You proc it extremely easily. The same way you proc your Axe procs very easily because of her 1 throwouts. The bouncing bubbles just hit people very easily. It just hits them. It's hard for them to dodge because there's so many times that it bounces. And so you get very easy Prophetic Cloak stacks. Also because of your long range auto attacks, it's also a very good way to stack it up as well. So you're definitely going to be going that over Thebes in this build. Next up after that, you're going to go into a Shogun's Kusari because cooldown does increase her regeneration, and also it's going to give you some good magical protection and also help out your team because most likely you're going to have a auto attack based teammate based off of the meta that we're currently in. And then after Shoguns, you're going to go into a Lotus Sickle. Lotus Sickle is very good in Yemoja because of her 2, her Mending Waters. You're going to be giving yourself and your teammates added protections. It's also going to give you some cooldown and some tankiness with the HP and a bit of a little bit of physical protections that it gives you as well. Next up, you're going to go into a Stone of Binding to make yourself even more tanky. You're going to be getting more physical protections and some health. And that Stone of Binding proc on her 1 is going to be very good. Also, it procs on her ultimate as well. So her 1 in her ultimate is going to be proccing on Stone of Binding. Now, the thing with Yemoja is usually it wouldn't be that good if it only procs on 1 ability. However, because of her Omi, she can spam her 1 quite often. So you get actually a lot of benefits out of Stone of Binding here. And then finally, you're going to round off the build with an Ethereal Staff so you can steal health and also do a little bit more damage and have some crowd control reduction. Very good way to end off the build. And then finally, obviously, we're going to upgrade the starting axe into a sundering axe so you can chunk people late game. And this is going to be your safe, traditional Yemoja build that you can go in almost every game pretty much and do well with. Now, the next build I'm going to show you is going to be one that I personally like going, and it's a little bit more spicy. You get a lot more utility out of it. You might be a little bit squishier depending on the situation, but I personally think you get the most bang for your buck out of this build. All right, so the start for this build is going to be basically exactly the same as the more traditional build I just showed you. So you're going to go into a tier 1 axe, into a tier 1 prophetic, get some HP pots, and then you're going to go into a sturdy stew because Bountiful Bow obviously does not work on Yemoja. And then eventually on your first back or even your second one, either before or after, depending on your own discretion, your first item buy, you're going to go into your Chalice of Healing for the rest of the game. Then it's exactly the same start as I gave you earlier before for the traditional build. And the first item, you can kind of guess it, is going to be upgrading your Prophetic Cloak fully because obviously you're 1, very easy at proccing Prophetic Cloak stacks, and also because of your Omi, you don't really have that many mana issues for the most part. You can get this stacked up very easily. And what's different about this build and the other one is the next one we're going to get a little greedy here. You're going to go into a Gauntlet of Thebes, your second item. The reason why this is kind of greedy is because you're doing 2 stacking items. The reason why you can kind of get away with this on Yemoja, however, is because you proc Prophetic Cloak very easily on her with your Bubble Strike, with your Bouncing Bubble, and your Moon Strike. So I personally think you have to kind of play a little bit more defensively with this because when you have these 2 items, you will be a little bit squishy in the early game, but once you get these builds stacked up, you will be very, very tanky into the mid to late game. So I like doing this. Next item after Thebes, you're going to go into Lotus Sickle. Again, same reasons as before. You're going to have some cooldown. It's going to help out your teammates. It's going to synergize very well with your 2. Give yourself some cooldown, some healing, and some movement speed. Very good item in Yemoja. Next item you're going to go into is a Relic Dagger. Relic Dagger is very good on Yemoja, so you can help out your teammates with more defensive type of relics, such as Meditation Cloak. You can go Shell. You could even go a little bit more offensive types. You can even go like a Heavenly Wings or even Horrific Emblem. Whatever you want. Relic Dagger is very good on Yemoja for being a support character. It's going to give you some cooldown, some tankiness, and being able to spam your relics more often. And then finally, to round out this build, something that's kind of spicy but works exceptionally well on Yemoja is a Spear of Desolation. Now hear me out, because she's going to be chunking. Your final upgrade is also going to be going into Sundering Axe, so you'll be getting damage and healing off of Sundering Axe, chunking the enemy team, especially with your 1 being so easy to hit people. That Spear of Desolation is going to be very good, because not only is this going to give you round out your build to 40% cooldown for maximum Omi regeneration, but whenever you get an assist or a kill on the Joust map, which is essentially almost every single time somebody dies because you're in such close proximity, whenever you get a kill, that Spear of Desolation proc essentially regenerates almost half, about a quarter, a little bit more than a quarter of your Omi, which is insane. So essentially, if you have full Omi and you just spam your abilities and then you eventually get a kill on one person, you can just continue spamming abilities, and it's very, very OP if you have that steam rolling ahead with Spear of Desolations. As you're getting kills, you can just keep on getting more and more of your cooldowns back, so you can spam your abilities up and just continue fighting without having to wait for it to regenerate. It's very good. So this is the more spicy take build if you want to do this. I personally like this build a bit better, but if you wanted to go the more traditional route, I already showed you that one before. Some honorable mentions you could do to change this up. You could obviously change Spear of Desolation to an Ethereal Staff. If you wanted more protections, you could go into a Spirit Robe and or a Stone of Binding. But yeah, this is both of your Yemoja builds, and some caveats for some additional picks as well.
All right, last but not least, for every single god, this is the last god that we're going to be doing, and it'll be the end of the series. We have Ymir, a very, very good god. He's very basic, though, but he does what he does very well. Stun, combo into his 1, and then he has your cheeky plays with his wall and his ult. Super basic, but it works very, very well. Ymir is probably definitely above middle of the road. He's definitely one of your better gods. It just depends on how good you are with Ymir, because a bad Ymir is nothing, well, it's bad because he doesn't have mobility. And if you're a good Ymir, you can counteract or counterbalance that with being, able to hit your stuff and use your wall correctly. But enough of that. Let's get into the build. Ymir is a pretty standard god, actually. He goes this pretty standard build. A couple of caveats, but pretty straightforward. He likes going into Axe. Don't really want to go anything else. He just, you can go Sands, I guess, but Warrior's Axe is a lot better on him. So we're going to go Warrior's Axe first. With him, he does use a lot of mana, so we're going to go into Mystical Earring. Then we're going to go into a Chalice of the Healing. Then finally, we're going to go into Bow. Bow for the cooldowns on him as well. Does not stack Pridwin. He does not stack Prophetic all that well. You can if you want to, but he's not that good on it. But we're going to go into a Gauntlet because it's safer and a lot easier to do. With him, I do like going Relic Dagger on him, but we're going to go into his Shoguns first, seeing as this does give you a lot of MP5. Mystical Earring will be there for MP5 as well, but you will have a lot more MP5 with Shogun, so you'll have 35 MP5, which should be enough. If you don't have healing, or if you don't have any gods that are hunters or ADCs for the benefit of Shogun's passive, then you are going to just go into an Heartward Amulet. Now, I'm not going to put that there. I've said it multiple times. It should be implicit at this point, but you can go and do Heartward if you don't have that hunter or ADC. But like I said, we're going to go into a Relic Dagger. Very similar to Cabrakan, very similar to all the other gods that benefit off of Relic Dagger's passive in terms of blink. Ymir is arguably one of the best ones to do it. You blink, and then you stun, and then you throw down your 2. And that basically, not only does that do a lot of damage, but his stun is deceptively long. His stun, once you level it up, can go up to 2.25 seconds, which is super long in terms of Smite is concerned. So Relic Dagger is definitely going to be really good for you. Very similar to what I said about Cab, making sure that you have your passive from your Relic Dagger, and similar to what I said with Ares, you're going to want to make sure that you have your blink up before they have their beads up. Because usually when you blink, stun, and then use your 2, Usually, for the most part, they're going to beads. And with Relic Dagger, you're going to have your blink up 40 seconds earlier than their beads, which means you have enough time to blink, stun them, and get that guaranteed stun with Ymir. So that is why you go Relic Dagger, that item. Now, like I said in a lot of the other builds, with Relic Dagger, you can forego this item and go later in the build, seeing as it is not the tankiest item. Again, it does give you 300 health, so it is technically tanky, but not in terms of protections. But you can always just forego this and do it later into the build. It is up to you, but like I said, I prefer like doing it earlier in the build due to the utility of it. And it's super fucking cheap. But next item, we're going to go into a Pridwin. And we're going to go into a Reverent Pridwin. Now, you can go Glorious Pridwin if you are able to. There's a stun combo where you stun, and then you automatically go into your ult, therefore securing the ult damage so they don't go away. And with that, you can go into a Glorious Pridwin and do that as well. But generally speaking, Reverent Pridwin is just for you to be tanky while you are in your ult, so you don't just get free casted and die. This will level out your... this will cap out your cooldown. You'll have 40% cooldown at this point. And then with your last item, after you sell your Mystical Earring, you're going to go into Stone of Binding. This works really well with his stun, his slow in his ult, and his slow from his 2. As this does do, or it does proc off of Stone of Binding's passive. So you're going to be able to do more damage and have your team do more damage to that as well. So Stone of Binding is really good on him as well. Now, there are a couple caveats after that. Well, first of all, we're going to go into Sundering Axe. That's what you're going to upgrade into, and that is your general build for Ymir. Now, like I said, there are caveats. One item that, or basically there's Spirit Robe. Spirit Robe is very good. You've seen it a lot, and no different with Ymir. He is very good with this. Now, like I said, you will be overcapping, but it is still good on him. And then finally, if you want a more damage, as this build has 0 damage in it, even though you don't need it because you do enough damage anyways, but if you want more damage, you can get rid of Stone of Binding or Relic Dagger for that instance, although preferably Stone of Binding because I think Relic Dagger is just too good for setup for Ymir. You can go Ethereal Staff in that place of Stone of Binding. But with that, that is your Ymir build, and that is your Guardians, your Warriors, your Assassins, your Mages, and your Hunters. That is all of them. Every single one of them. I can't believe that we were able to get all of the gods build path. I hope you guys did enjoy that. I know I've been getting a lot of support from you guys. Being able to... I've been getting a lot of support for you guys from the videos. I've gotten... so many comments and so many so many of you guys talking about different builds and stuff and helping me out, actually, especially in that assassin video. Shouts out to the set guy. I can't remember your name right now, sorry, but I appreciate all of you for watching this video. But like I said in a lot of my videos, I'm going to preface this, or I'm going to end this off with the same type of thing that I said, that all these builds are general, and I think you guys already know this at this point. But there are so many different items on so many different gods that you can pretty much go all different types of builds, especially those niche builds if you're playing with the 3Q, for example. But yeah, the only god that we didn't do is Mom and Bridget. She unfortunately came out a little bit after I finished my Assassins video. So I can make like a short on YouTube if I really wanted to make a build on her if you guys want to or whatever. But yep, that's pretty much all of it. If you guys have any suggestions or you have any type of feedback, or if you want to go in the comments and roast us, because I think I got a couple comments about that and I enjoy them. I actually do. I do love talking about builds, and so does Mr. Dr. Professor Michael. So this is definitely a passion of ours. So if you do want to talk about us in the comment section, go ahead. It is fine. But with that, comment, like, and subscribe. And that's all I got for you. So thank you guys for watching.